certainly the Zionists have used it and brought it, in fact, to the area. Terrorism, as we know it today, the planting of bombs in marketplaces and so on and so forth, was, in fact, introduced into the Middle East by the Zionists in the 1920s. But the net result of Zionist terrorism and violence in the first third of the 20th century has brought forth, to my mind, the anomaly, the horrific and unacceptable status in the Middle East today of the State of Israel, which is in fact an armed garrison state, which now exports more arms and distributes violence all around the world, vastly disproportionate to its size. I mean, in that respect, I think it's a horrible cycle of violence. But in it all, I think the Palestinian is the victim. There's no question about that.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant, independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours. Friday, September 20th, 2024. Thank you for joining me today. A very important follow-up story today. Really, I mean, it is generally a follow-up for a lot of reasons, but the story of specifically the pager attack in Lebanon and how this has been a continuing developing issue. And that clip starting, I've made that point many times right there. And it's important to understand that this is an academic reality, to understand what, the idea of what we have of suicide vests and all these conversations. Zionism is the impetus for these conversations. And it's an important time to reiterate that point because of what just happened in the many different civilian locations where this happened. Now we're going to go over that point to start today. The importance of understanding that, and again, forgive those that are used to the more day-to-day coverage. We will get back to that, I promise. That you're used to. I'm going to covering some things that are going to be over the last so many days, and from the beginning of that event up until now, to highlight or maybe just make sure you understand what happened there. Make sure you have all the facts to discuss this conversation. Who was involved, whether the U.S. government knew, how Israel went about doing this, what companies they used, how long ago it was planned, so the full picture. Because there's a lot of, as always, misinformation flying around. But then the point of today's show is to highlight how important that is with the reality, the very unnerving reality with what we just saw of how the U.S. government, really just the United States tech industry, which I recommend you look at Whitney's conversations and her work around the kind of the fascistic kind of meshing of Silicon Valley and our government in a lot of different ways. But the infiltration of Israeli Unit 8200 intelligence-connected startup companies throughout our tech field in very alarming ways. It draws to mind the conversation of the China discussion of our Apple phones and all these different, which are very much was a concern and should be. Any foreign entity that is infiltrating your tech and has backdoors to your information, anything like that, obviously should matter. That was the premise for the whole point at that time. Why now is this not a concern with what they just demonstrated? Well, the obvious answers you'll get, because they would never do that, because we're a strategic partnership and all these different, despite the fact that Israel has very much done that to the U.S. and to Americans repeatedly since its inception, all the way to this very day this very moment, in fact, where they just killed an American activist in Israel and your government simply didn't care. And we'll touch on that a little bit today. So let's talk about this from the beginning. Now, actually, I wanted to start with one point that I want to make sure you didn't miss in regard to our the update on our recent panel we had from the IMA, which will open with a point about the independent mainstream alternative media and why that's an important conversation for this. But really just so you see that the developing part of that initiative, that alliance that we're building, but also that you see, it's important to recognize the angles of how the mainstream alternative media, as David Icke coined, controls, manipulates, drives a lot of these conversations. And right now, it's obvious what side of the false two-party paradigm, or just your government, is driving or hiding most of the stuff. So the narratives around Israel, to make sure we see it in a very specific light. But as always, it's a teeter-totter. It goes back and forth depending on what's going on. It is simply the uniparty playing different roles, as we've talked about a lot, but we're not going to get into that so much today. But let's start with this, just in case you missed it. We had a really great panel announcing the Independent Media Alliance. This is actually our press release. I'll show you the panel next. We put this out both on Conscious Resistance. Pretty much a lot of us put it out in different platforms, just the Media Alliance announcement. And really, it was just to highlight for you what this was about and just so you understand what we're trying to accomplish. And all we said was we're thrilled to announce the creation of the Independent Media Alliance, a collaborative effort focused on promoting objective, fact-based media from a diverse team of journalists, podcasters, and writers. Our emphasis will be on countering narratives currently being seeded within the, quote, alternative media space, including but not limited to the false two-party paradigm, hopium in politicians, support for imperial wars, fifth-generation warfare, and technocratic solutions to legitimate problems. For example, digital IDs pitched as the only solution for immigration, voting fraud prevention, or whatever else they'd like to fit in there. The IMA will take several actions in the pursuit of this goal, including regular panels and debates featuring Alliance members and guests, collaborative and joint investigations, and launching a new decentralized media network to host relevant content from Alliance members. Now, the Independent Media Alliance will be partnering with the decentralized video platform Odyssey to ensure that the content cannot easily be censored. Now, right at the moment, that's still sort of developing. So there may be reasons that come up down as this process develops that we may decide to change course. But at the moment, and I'm only saying that just to be objective, because right now it seems like that's our direction. They're building something that will be the very first decentralized media network. Now, the list down here is are the people that have so far, that are officially part of the dynamic going forward. There's a few out there, like, for instance, Catherine Austin Fitz or True Stream Media, that they've signaled that they want to be a part of this, but they're busy and they don't want to necessarily start at the moment, and so on. So the point is, this is going to be evolving going forward. To be clear about things to start, the reality is, really, Derek, Whitney, and myself were very explicit about this in our early conversations, and we all agree at this point that financial aspects of this are not part of the conversation. We're not seeking funding. We're not asking for funding. We're not even in regard to the Odyssey part of this, our discussions are about not allowing there to be any financial dynamic. Like, if individuals within this, like myself and our links down in the chat, want to say, hey, if you want to donate to me personally, it's right there, of course. But the idea of any other concept, which is important with all that's going on, is not part of this. It is simply an alliance of people with what we just described, the idea that we see something very alarming happening in the illusion of independent media, and it's important that we want to err on the side of nonpartisan, objective, fact-based, rooted in integrity content. So I feel very positive about this, and I think a lot of good things are going to come from this, despite all the kind of irrational screaming of people that think this is bad for unescribed. The reasons are usually pretty broad and subjective. The point is, I'm not asking you to buy in anything or buy anything. Simply judge it by the fruits as we go forward. And the recent panel that we just put out, make sure I'm not missing anything I was going to say there. Really just that this is, I'm excited about this, and I do think this is going to be very positive. And the ultimate point, I think, is we're going to sort of make whatever we decide seems like that's going to be Odyssey being a hub in a decentralized network where individuals within this group can post their content, but we also have the main place to be posting this through. So at the moment, we put this through TLAV, and that might be kind of oscillating between channels before we get that going, but that's ultimately the plan. So this was our first discussion, debunking the false binary with the Independent Media Alliance. And we'll have plenty more conversations even just on this topic. And again, I used an American-centric image because I thought it was important to make that point, but ultimately I made the real clear point here, this is much bigger than the United States. It is the binary idea that's used even outside of politics to force us into a position where in many cases we think we're making the choice, but we're not being given the full picture. So make sure you check this out. We had a really good conversation. Oh, I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry, just really irritated immediately by the idea that it looks like Rumble is, for some reason, not playing. Well, I don't want to waste time. I want to make sure we get into this. I'll fix that later, I guess. I'm not sure. Rumble. There we go. That's pretty interesting, isn't it? Well, anyway, for some reason, Rumble was still playing the opening of that video that was aired the day before yesterday, I think. The point is, I want to show you here really quickly who was in it. For the time being, for the show, these were the people that joined. We're going to have a lot more people coming in and joining and discussing. And that's the last thing I was going to say. I knew there was something. One of the next two things we're going to do. There's going to be a panel, just a kind of an announcement from Derek, Whitney, and I in a video form, and sort of have a little panel of our own, which we wanted to do before this, but just timing didn't work out, where we're going to sort of announce it publicly and just in a video form as well. And then I think one of the next things we want to try and do is, we're discussing who, but we want to try to find somebody that it's a very small channel out there that has been doing amazing work through COVID-19, 1984, through the Israel-Gaza discussion, through to any coverage of the two-party illusion, which was our three kind of main things we're highlighting. and rise them up and say, look at this person doing amazing work. And the reason they're not getting attention is because they're nonpartisan, because they're objective, because they don't meet these boxes that the partisans sides want to endorse. So look forward to that. Again, please judge it by its fruits, because that's what all we're asking. There's so many things that are being, conclusions being jumped to. I'm just excited about the fact that we're working with so many great people with great independent thoughts, and we don't agree on everything. And I think this is what independent media should really be about. Now, on top of that, I wanted to highlight what World Alternative Media pointed about this, and this is this same thread that keeps going around. It's really interesting. So Terry Bull put this out like months ago, and it says, in a time of deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. Unfortunately, many big accounts on Twitter are compromised, chasing money, but real journalism is still alive. You'd think she's pointing at us. No, she's pointing at all the people that are big accounts that are compromised, that are chasing money on Twitter. I'm kind of joking, but most of them, there's a few in here that I think do some good work here and there. But the bottom line is, if you look through this list, you're going to find people that are prolific, intentional liars, in my opinion, who are actively promoting things that they know aren't to be true, or are lying for your truth. And the bottom line, maybe they don't even know that, but look for yourself. It's the people that I've highlighted over the years, many of them that are constantly, like Chuck Costello's in there. I pointed it out during the beginning of the October 7th discussion. One of the most important lies he put out right in the beginning was the lie about all the children, their burned bodies in that dumpster, which he deleted right after, which still got used for a long time. Robert called it out right in the beginning and said, nope, those are members of Hamas that they killed. Right? And they pretended they were all. The bottom line is they put out things, whether they're a lot of the independent mainstream alternative media is putting out information that they're not vetting, that they jump to conclusions about, or just blatantly lying to you. Maybe they're not doing it on purpose. The point is that's irrelevant to the idea of actually showing, what we're trying to build. Due diligence, taking time, acting with integrity, making sure that this stuff is accurate, whether or not it's partisan related or whether or not it helps the person that you want to highlight. And as he wrote, all the people who hijack the truth community with solutions like vote and trust us. Yeah, great. And he says, David Icke, in case you want to have a laugh, check this out. This is what you've been saying in a nutshell, which is the mainstream alternative media. Now, Whitney pointed this out, and I think this is an extension of this point, which is really interesting. Now, she's been highlighting the idea that she has been depersoned on Facebook, where you have, and I mean, I think a lot of us are dealing with much smaller examples, but this is a pretty prominent example. It's really interesting. Like on Telegram, for example, there's every other day I see a new person pretending to be TLAV saying, hey, join this crypto thing, which I will never do that. Whether I support it or not, I'm not selling you anything. I'm not posting links to anything ever. Even if I have shirts to sell, I simply point it out in the show. You never see me do that. So don't fall for that. Or on Rumble, for example, there's a fake TLAV account that makes comments pretending to be me. I see it all the time. It has TLAV at the end and a 1 at the end. A lot of times you can't see that. This is Whitney's account on Facebook pretending to be Whitney, not this here, but this is her pointing it out. What's interesting about this story we're going to highlight is what Whitney says here is this fake Facebook account impersonating her that Facebook, in fact, refuses to remove. And she's been highlighting this for a long time, is being tagged and promoted, as she's claiming here, by Simone Gold. And it does appear that way. What's interesting is it turns out that what people are highlighting is that's also a fake account. Turns out it's a Facebook account pretending to be her with 52 followers on Facebook. Simone Gold has a really large following. So it's interesting to me is what we're beginning to see is the outline. It's more, this is what we're seeing. We're trying to show people there's a very like a very surreptitious thing going on Facebook and Twitter and all these different platforms. It always has been going on. But in this case, now you've got a fake Whitney web account making fake content and then a fake Simone Gold account sharing that content and going, look, we're working together to make this big thing. No one of these platforms care. And she's simply going, look, this is crazy. Now, at the moment, and they've tagged her on here, so I think she's seen this, but she's highlighting this. I'm not part of this. She's like, nothing to do with this project or Gold, and I continue to reject the fake accounts' efforts to impersonate or reperson me as a means to discredit my reputation and my work. This is happening everywhere. And now, especially with this new project, which people seem to be very desperately concerned about, I guarantee more of this will happen. People trying to make up narratives to make us look like we're doing something we're not. I mean, this is the world of deepfakes. This is where it's going. And the announcement says our film, What is a Doctor, will be released October 6th. We're going to blow the lid off the gender-affirming care and expose the healthcare industry. And it simply says, you don't want to miss this with Whitney Webb. And so what are they trying to accomplish here? Is it all just about discrediting her, or is it about trying to use them to push their own narratives? It's pretty unnerving, isn't it? Now, Decentralized News has been highlighting her being depersoned. Now, Cheryl's the one that pretty much highlighted this, tagging her real account here on which is almost 1 million followers, but simply highlighting that this is not really her. And it's very interesting. I just wanted you guys to see that. You know, who knows what the objective is, but clearly there's a lot of this going on, and a lot of this overlaps with this kind of just fake building. Really, it's not even alternative media; it's mainstream media. I mean, most of these people are huge elitists with lots of backing from money, and you can't see. And half of them are people that just stepped one half step away from corporate media, and are like, "We're independent." Just don't buy it. Oh, and this is just the same tweet right there. Now, here, David Icke chimed in, not about this explicitly, but on the 16th, and simply said, I keep saying this about what he said here, saying this to so much abuse, because I keep saying this, essentially, you get so much abuse because it's true and in your face, if you would only open your eyes and see. Thank goodness others like Whitney can see it. You are being misled by those who say they are on your side. Wake up before the alternative, in quotes, hijack leads you over the same cliff the workers are heading for. Now, the reason this is important, just in an opening note that I want you guys to see, but also consider this as we're literally watching the most important ally of our government openly carrying out terrorist attacks that are indiscriminately hurting people. Now, whether or not we'll get into the pagers were explicitly Hezbollah pagers, which, by the way, the information does not make that even remotely provable. But the point being that they were clear. There was, I'll just say it now, 5 months out is when they started this. There's no way they could know where these pagers went and who was holding them, or whether they were in somebody's bag that was taken by other people, or in a plane or in a car, which most of these things happened. So the point is, the partisanship largely will ignore these things. But my concern is the fact that this government that is doing these things is explicitly, like incredibly obviously, infiltrated the tech field in this country. And most of these people on the right now will ignore that because the same people, the Elons and Thiels and Trump, they're all supporting that same direction, including Israel. So it's important to see how we're being misled. And now, as I've always pointed out, it goes back and forth. Just like during COVID-19, the left was blind to this conversation. And I think the right more so saw it. But I think that's why Trump was used in that situation to pacify them. But it's never about, they're the ones that see it, they're the ones that don't. It always changes. They're playing you against yourselves. That's the two-party illusion, or multiple parties in some countries, but it's still the same game. Still the false, whatever you would call it, false binary in the same concept, you know? So here's what Whitney had to say about this. Speaking with Richard Willett, by the way, who I've interviewed with many times.
A lot of the bullying tactics that used to be mainstream media directed at alternative media are now being weaponized within alternative media, now that it's coming to sort of supplant MSM. And we have the mainstream alternative media, as David Icke has called it. I think it's a very good name for it. We have that growing and developing itself and linking itself very much to Trump world and political parties elsewhere as well. And I think, a lot of people sort of, are being sucked to sort of a hope and change operation for right-leaning, freedom-loving, Constitution-loving, and also gun-owning Americans, because the gun ownership is a problem for people, the powers that be in the United States. How do we disarm the public? Well, the easiest way to disarm the public is not to come take their guns. It's to psychologically neuter them. And how do you do that? You make them think that their guy who loves and protects them is gonna, solve every problem once he's in office, and you can just sit back in your armchair and relax and trust the plan. Getting the gun owners to just sit back and be compliant. They'll be more compliant when they think their guy's running the show, right? And their guy that's running the show, or that they hope will run the show, Trump, when he was in office last time, he called on social media companies to profile users to enact a pre-crime paradigm where people that might commit shootings before they happen should be targeted by social media and reported to law enforcement. And then his administration was considering a program to basically use AI to go over social media profiles and social media posts of regular Americans and look for what they called early warning signs of neuropsychiatric violence, and then have those people like go by court order to a court-ordered physician and be like medicated, put under house arrest, or indefinitely detained. So people, this is why I say policy records really matter, because people talk about Trump and the vaccine, and yes, that's absolutely true, but there's a lot of other stuff that happened during his administration that is bad for the Constitution, bad for freedom and liberty.
Right. And this is this is the whole point. That, policy history is all that matters, in my opinion, because everything else is narrative. Now, even if they mean it, the point is, who knows what may come along next where they just changes their dynamic, changes their opinion, or they can't do it. The bottom line is what you can see of what they've already done, what they've followed through with. That's what matters. And so what we can see is an example of that already being the case, where promises were not followed through with. Now, whether you think there's a reason behind it or not, the bottom line is what we're seeing now are the same kind of dynamic where you're saying a lot of things you think people want to hear, and many people just want to accept that as hopeful. And I get it. I want to be hopeful too. But her point ultimately is that whether it's the vaccine, which is more than enough, by the way, the amazing reality of what you can ignore of the guy who, I mean, just how can you ignore the continual support for that thing? It's unreal to me that anyone can blind themselves to that. But there's a lot of other examples she highlights. And even just speaking with Dan Cohen about the idea of the Global Fragility Act, which is currently being used right now to try to reoccupy Haiti. This was passed under Trump's administration. It's important to stand back and see the bigger picture. The left and the right are the same thing. Kamala and Trump will drive you in the same direction, even though you don't want to admit that to yourself. I hope I'm wrong. I really do. Now, here's what somebody followed up with, saying, just one question to David Icke. I mean, no offense if you happen to read this. How can we be sure that you're not controlled opposition? I'd love to hear your take on this. And I wholeheartedly agree with David's point. This is like me. This is what I was just saying about the IMA. Judge it by its fruits. Question everything. He says that's exactly the question you should be asking about everyone. If they stand up to scrutiny, great. If they don't, you'll see who you can trust. And I mean, obviously there's a point in there where maybe somebody just fails in some way that makes you think they're. The point is that it's erring on the side of accuracy, erring on the side of integrity and principles. If somebody falls short, then you make sure you note that. You don't give them excuse and go, well, there must be something that makes that make sense, which was the only thing I seemed to hear during Trump's administration. He'd bring up this crazy thing or be using the story that came out about him, about the military using the largest non-nuclear bomb in Afghanistan without even asking Trump. And I showed people, that can't be true. Well, yeah, it was. But people just didn't want to hear it because it was something that didn't make sense to their paradigm. The point is, if you apply the same level of criticism and truly question all of them, this wouldn't be that difficult. But most people don't want to do that. That's team sport politics. He says, if they don't, you'll see you can trust. He says, I've been doing this for 35 years, long before anyone but a tiny few was revealing any of this. And he's right. He says, is that more likely to be controlled opposition or those who have moved in since the pioneers revealed the themes of control, which are now being revealed as bombshell news and breaking news? That's the revelation of the method kind of thing, like well past the point they want you to see it now as they drive you into the next part. He has been calling this out for a long time. He says, ask yourself who is bringing anything new to the table. If they aren't, just repeating what others have revealed long ago, big red flag. This is why I really appreciate David Icke and I support his long-term work, despite what people may think about some of the claims he puts out. He really has been calling this out in a larger way for such a long, more than almost anybody. Now, on the voting side of this, I'm going to include these, just kind of quickly go through, but I thought it's important to think about stuff like this. Because the point is we're leading into this, and we will talk about this increasingly as we get closer to the day of the selection. But Thomas Massey recently put this out and said, our country was founded upon, quote, the consent of the governed to be governed. At what point will citizens rescind that consent? Productive, moral people will not forever consent to serve a kleptocracy, regardless of whether it has the trappings of a democracy or a republic. Now, I think what is kleptocracy again? It's the ruled by the people who use their power to steal countries' resources. There's also there's an oligarchy and there's corporatocracy. It's all generally kind of the same dynamic, in my opinion. The bottom line is that let's just say you decided you wanted to rescind your consent. What does that look like today? Can you stand up and be like, you no longer govern? No, we don't live in a democracy. We don't even live in a republic. We don't live in anything we're told that we do today. Now, whether that's always been the case or not isn't a good question, but right now it's not the point. The point is that we need to recognize that. Look, if every American stood up right now and said, we don't recognize your ability to govern us, you think they would care? You think they would slowly stand down and give us their weapon? No, guys, that's important to recognize. The idea of the Constitution saying that we have the right to alter or abolish it should be recognized. They no longer meet the needs of what we're expecting. They don't care about these things, despite it being in the Constitution. That's clear by other things they're trying to alter. But this is a member of Congress highlighting to us that we should be doing that. Now, whether that is in and of itself a ploy, I'm skeptical of all politicians, but I do appreciate the point. I said exactly what many of us are trying to draw attention to regarding the upcoming selection. Lesser of evils is the manipulation. All we are doing is consenting to 4 more years of the same. I know you all sense this. Time to stop going through the motions and stand on principle. Now, before all those screeching partisans out there scream about, well, what'd you do? We've already gone over this 4,000 times. And this isn't the point today. But just because you have not done your due diligence or even cared to look at the shows that are literally titled about what you would do instead, doesn't mean you should demand the point is there are other paths to take. The idea of falling back into what else am I going to do? That is giving up. But I want you guys to think about the idea that there are other paths, and maybe one of those is simply standing up and trying to acknowledge that they no longer deserve your consent, whichever side you think you're looking at. Now, I think in interest of time, I'll just include these because I want to get right to the point. We've already been on for 25 minutes, but Caitlin Johnstone made a great point here about the election in general. You know what? I'll read this one and skip the next one. They'll both be included. She made a point about why she talks about this stuff. But she simply said the election in November will be rigged. This election rigging will not be done by Russia or by China or by Iran or by far-right coup plotters or by some shadowy cabal tampering with voting machines. It will be, well, probably somewhat of all of those things might be happening too, but it says it will happen right out in the open. It will be perfectly legal. That's the important part to think about. That's the idea of rescinding your consent because of things like this. They're doing what they're supposed to be doing in their minds. It says, in fact, it's already happening. This election is being rigged by the donor class. It's being rigged by lobby groups. It's being rigged by the plutocrat-owned mass media and by plutocrat-controlled Silicon Valley algorithm manipulation. Now, there's the overlap we'll talk about. It's being rigged by obscenely wealthy people who can afford to extract political favors in exchange for massive campaign donations in ways normal members of the public could never. It's being rigged by people who've bought up so much narrative control in the form of media ownership that they can set agendas for the entire country in ways that average voters have no chance of ever doing. These election meddlers dictate the political framework and information environment in which elections take place. We're seeing that right now. They decide what positions will be considered normal and acceptable and which will be considered radical and extreme. That's why both of them are blindly going, I support Israel. No, I support Israel. It says they predetermine the location and range of the political spectrum at which the election will be contested, and they restrict the Overton window of acceptable political opinion within which debates and discourse will occur. They do this without any regard for the interest of ordinary members of the public, but solely for their own interests. That's why you see candidates arguing about whether wars should be whether wars should happen, but not which wars should happen. And rather, let me make sure I say that right. That's why you see candidates arguing not about whether war should happen, but which war should happen and how they should occur. Always war is the point. It's why you see them accusing one another of being too weak or dovish on foreign policy instead of attacking each other as reckless warmongers. It's why you see them arguing over who loves Israel the most and who will send it the most weapons rather than who will do the most to end Israel's genocidal atrocities. And this is the reason you don't get to see the actual breadth of the full picture of what people might be running for president, whether they're popular or not, because they will say those things. Even if it's simply an interest of being the opposite of them, which is my point about making that possible. You will find more opportunists that will step in and give you what you want to hear, but we can use them as vehicles for change as long as we maintain the understanding that all politicians lie. The point here is that whether you're talking third party or even people that are not even acknowledged, there are people that have the opinions exactly like this. They don't want them being expressed because then it forces the Kamala Trump duopoly uniparty to address those things. And it's impossible to see. It's possible to ignore how weak they are on those positions when challenged with one that's real. It's why she says you see them debating who supports most fracking and oil drilling instead of promising to end ecocidal policies and stop the corporate destruction of our environment. It's why you see them arguing over the minute details of what capitalism and imperialism should look like rather than if capitalism and imperialism should exist at all. It's why when you see a candidate show up with a platform of ending war and militarism, stopping ecocide and curbing the injustices and abuse of capitalism, they are treated as outlandish extremists, not just by the rich and powerful, but by ordinary members of the public who've been indoctrinated by all of this manipulation into accepting status quo politics as the norm. This rigged-controlled political environment is what we were all born into. So we're conditioned to think it's normal. It's very easy to miss how freakish and abominable the whole thing is, how destructive it is, how much needless death and misery and destruction it causes. This is rampant lawlessness we talk about. It becomes normal. She goes on, if we came from a healthy world into this one, we would scream in horror. But because we've never lived in a healthy world, we can be manipulated into mistaking the sickness of the civilization for health. Elections are rigged in this way by a fairly small group of plutocrats and empire managers, not just in the United States, but throughout the Western world. Really the world, in my opinion. They rig our entire political system in their favor and then have the gall to tell us we need to freak out because some Russians made some Facebook memes near election season. This is not democracy. This is plutocracy. This is oligarchy. We're just indoctrinated into calling it democracy. And I'm arguing we don't even want democracy, which is simply mob rule, by the very same mass-scale psychological manipulations they use to keep it from being a democracy. Now, remember, this country is founded on being a constitutional republic. But it says all U.S. elections these days come with allegations of election interference, especially from the losing side. But it's important to keep in mind that even in the unlikely event that those allegations were 100% true, they'd still be a tiny drop in the ocean compared to the election interference that's already happening right out in the open. We just pretend it's normal. Now, here is another example of Donald Trump expressing very recently that Israel used to be able to control who's in politics. Not a surprise because we've already talked about this. He said this many times. I just want people to recognize before we get into more explicit examples of the terrorism they're conducting, including against Americans, including in ways that could affect you right now. Here he is telling you that they used to be able to decide who was in politics. And if you said a bad thing about Israel, well, you wouldn't be in politics.
Entire world, and you have to take it that it is a wake-up call. Get smart. Instead, even here in America, Jewish citizens have been forced to endure the worst outbreak of anti-Semitism in many generations.
100% false. Every single time they show these statistics, it's always shown that the ADL and the rest are simply using every single allegation or claim or example of Palestinian protest or from the river to the sea, except not when Israel says it, or any number of examples. And then we saw during the campus protest fervor that they kept using examples that then later were proven not even to be true. So the bottom line is this is a wild Zionist manipulation in order to justify its existence. And most Jews, in my opinion, that I talk to are beginning to see through it. But Donald Trump is being funded by this Zionist organization and everybody else, and Israel included, probably more than that. You can imagine what I mean. The bottom line is this is ridiculous for him to say based on things that are already been shown to be at least hyperbolic, exaggerated, but it's what he says next, which is most concerning.
And so many people shockingly even deny the attack took place. This is a new thing. I saw it recently where they're interviewing.
The attack? Like you're just kind of lumping it all into one thing, right? They're just denying it because that's how this works. If you deny a claim of a Zionist, you must be racist, even though we're talking about Zionism and not Judaism, which they love to conflate. Oh, right now, based on this new Building Anti-Semitism Act, that would be considered a crime, even though it's actually true and it's actually free speech. But listen to this guy tell you why free speech is so important. No, exactly the opposite.
People, they said, well, we don't know if there was an attack. I don't know. It's just so terrible. And, there were people I read many times during the Holocaust, we had people denying it. They were deniers. They said, we don't believe it ever took place. And it's a terrible thing when they say that. And
I mean, you know how you can tell that he's just repeating what somebody told him? Or rather, it was put to him to say this in this conversation? What do you mean during the Holocaust they were denying? What he's trying to say is that people denied the Holocaust. I mean, I have no doubt there was somebody during the time frame that was going, I don't even know. But are we actually pretending there was some kind of like mass movement during the time frame going, that's not really happening? My point is that what he's actually talking about, whether that exists in some part of the conversation or not at the time, is that people denied that it happened or denied what the claims were, despite the fact that Israel has been caught during its entire existence bolstering and lying about damn near everything. The reality around this, I recommend you listen to Norman Finkelstein, who explicitly highlights the reality of the Holocaust, but also argues that, but saying that you're not allowed to deny this idea, even if they're wrong, is obviously a violation of your free speech. And the whole point is it creates what they're trying to build. But that's why I point to him, because people try to misrepresent him as denying it, when in reality, he's not. His very clear statements are the opposite of that. This is why they end up getting caught lying for damn near everything, because it's so obvious that what they're trying to do is manipulate you, rooted on things that are completely fabricated. And I'm talking about just the point I made in regard to October 7th and pretty much entire history. Again, to be clear, Finkelstein would tell you as a Jew himself in the history that this was something that did take place. The numbers you can dispute because you have free speech if you choose to look into it. But the bottom line, is that what we're talking about here is the idea that people denied these things. Now, he's overlapping that big story with the reality of things that were completely lied about. Why? Because that's how you do this. If somebody says a bad thing about Israel, racist, Holocaust, that's how this goes. And people are starting to call it out. It's not insulting to point it out when you can prove they're continuing to, well, really, it's not insulting to point it out in general because that's your opinion. You have a right to free speech. People can be insulted if they want, but it is also true. And they do this, and it's constant in regard to, and just to, again, to be clear, despite the fact that it's said every 30 seconds, we're talking about Zionism manipulating the world, including Jews, into believing these lies. And I'm only here talking about the idea of claims of anti-Semitism post-October 7th. It's flimsy on its face. I think it was like 400% increase they claimed. That's what they're pointing to. That was rooted in absolute fabrication. Now, to be clear on top of all that, obviously there's racism. Obviously there's anti-Semitism. And we can also overlap that with the idea of what Semites really are and the lie about all of that. But the bottom line point is anyone trying to say it doesn't exist is lying to you. Anyone saying that it's 400% spike is also lying to you. That's the reality of being objective and nonpartisan.
Never thought I would see anything like what is happening right now. I never thought you'd ever see a thing like this ever happen. It's beyond belief.
Now, what do you think he's talking about? Yeah, you might be shocked to find out that he's totally not talking about the biggest genocide we've seen in our lifetimes that Israel's yet again involved in. No, not Bosnia. No, not Rwanda. This one also that Israel was involved in. And he's talking about, I guess, the general discussion of anti-Semitism post-October 7th. And that's what he's talking about. That's his, I can't believe what I'm seeing. But let's keep giving them weapons to murder children and starve them to death, use disease as a weapon of war. But I can't believe what I'm seeing around these false claims. Really? I mean, how does that not shock honest, objective people? Even if you believe in Trump, even if you believe in Israel, you have to acknowledge, I mean, it's just mind-blowing that would be your thing that you're blown away by when you're watching them commit genocide that the entire world can see.
Right now, I never thought you'd ever see a thing like this ever happen. It's beyond belief. 15 years ago, Israel was the strongest lobby, if you want to use the word lobby, had the strongest representation of people like this.
He's pointing at Miriam Adelson and Zionist support. Like, they're not lobbyists sitting there, by the way. Here's what's important, what he just did. He'll say it.
These are great people,
Miriam. Okay, just so you heard that. Okay, so what he just did right there was simply point to Israeli Zionists who are supporting him. Adelson is, really, remember Sheldon, a very wealthy individual that's always been influencing politics. This is Miriam, which is his wife after he passed away, continuing the same thing. Now, this is not AIPAC. These are direct connections to Israel. So all he just did right there, which is what he seems to constantly do, maybe there's a point they're doing it on purpose, I don't know, but he just let the cat out of the bag. No, we're not talking about lobbyists. We're talking about Israel directly influencing U.S. policy. They're not even trying to hide this anymore. I mean, AIPAC itself is clumsy and obvious because of what they've been doing over the last couple of years. Like, they've gone, even MSNBC broke this down. It's very clear. The FAR Act is obviously relevant here. But he just pointed out that it's just all lobbying. Israel influence our politics, lobbying. No, it's infiltration of our politics. And of course, that become racist. No, it's obvious. And we're not talking about Jews. We're not talking about Israelis. We're talking about Zionist influence. And that overlaps both those things, but it also overlaps with Christianity. It overlaps with a lot of different things. It is a political ideology, and it's politically influencing this political campaign.
But the strongest there was, if you said something about a Jewish person or something about Israel that was bad, you were out of politics.
How do you get away with saying something like that? Like, that's not the right way to frame that. Like, think about what he just said. And I'll play the other one of them, but I got 4 clips of him saying this over the last couple of months. He's explicitly saying, and repeated it 4 times now, that at the golden age was when Israel got to decide who was in politics. When they could just, like, if you said, the other one, which I'll play now, he says, well, they used to have complete control of Congress, rightfully so. How do we not acknowledge this? Where are all the Republicans, around specifically conservatives, that are not blinded by team smart politics, but believe in Trump, that are unhappy with this? Where is that crowd? It must exist. Speak up and go, that's crazy. I don't care whether it's Iran or China or Russia or Israel. You're talking about a foreign government. He's stating that we should be okay with them controlling what Congress does. This is him just saying that back then that you wouldn't even be in politics if you said bad things about Israel. It doesn't matter whether they commit terrorism, which they've been doing for 75 years, or murdering Palestinians. No, it's just, you won't be involved. Why do you think we're in the position we're in?
Unless your name was Ted Cruz, he could get through.
I'm not sure what he meant by that, unless you're Ted Cruz. I'm, maybe let me know in the chat what you think he means by that. But so here's the next clip, and this is the one that was on a radio show not long ago. And here I'll just show you the next clip, just so you remember this. And I'm not going to play all three of them. Well, all four technically. This was from a campaign rally with Israeli flags behind him, even though it's a Trump Vance rally. That makes a lot of sense, right? And Miriam Adelson there to support him because she's giving him $100 million and explicitly stated by Israeli media, so he'll allow her to continue to annex the West Bank. Well, that's already beginning to happen now anyway, but the point is it's illegal. He agreed to allow that illegal thing to happen, so he got money for it. That seems like a crime to me. But either way, the bottom line is that, and just so it's clear, Kamala is doing the same thing. They're all in the same, maybe not Miriam, but they're all doing the same thing. All of these clips say the same, and here's Miriam pretty much saying the same thing as well, that Congress or politics should be influenced by Israel, and that's what we need to get back to. He says this in many different ways or similar ways in all four of these clips. Here's the one you probably remember.
The biggest change I've seen in Congress is Israel literally owned Congress. You understand that 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And it was so powerful. It was so powerful. And I think you know exactly what I'm saying. They had such power. Israel had such power, and rightfully. Israel had such power, and rightfully. They had such power. Israel had such power, and rightfully, over Congress.
Israel was the most powerful lobby in the country 15 years ago. Today, between TLAV and AOC and all of these people, what they're doing, Israel, they don't have the backing that they once had.
You'll give it to them.
Yeah, I'm good.
And the point is, they also said another clip where they wouldn't be in politics today if they had the power they should. So just in multiple styles, he's telling you that Israel should, one, be dictating who's allowed in politics in the United States government, and two, can ultimately decide, or rather, two, is rightfully supposed to be there, is the better way to put it. Unreal. I mean, I just can't. And again, in case you're pretending we're only aiming at Trump, Kamala is in the same position. What's important to me is that this seems to be the choice. That's how I see it. But I mean, like I joked on the radio shows this morning, I'm pretty sure Democrats would vote for a potted plant with a Democrat sticker on it if it goes both ways, really, because it's really just about how that person's worse. So you give me anything other than that, and we're going to vote for it because, well, that's worse. And they're both doing it. It's just so sad what we're watching right now. Now, here's what Craig Mokhiber said, and then we're going to get into the Lebanon discussion, and that'll be the rest of the conversation today. He says, Israel provided his military support to South Africa during apartheid. Undeniable. I mean, and don't forget, one of the things they were working on, and this is public information, were specifically, I'm blanking on the word all of a sudden, bioweapons that are focused on specific ethnicities, ethnic-focused bioweapons. It's not a secret. It's very, and there's all sorts of document. Now, that's not to say they succeeded. I think that there's some level of the research that's still going on in the United States and elsewhere, and Israel. But the point is that was, in fact, what was going on. Now, and also to Rwanda, before, during, and after the genocide, which I'll include this link for you to go through and watch this show. It's public knowledge, but people just don't like to talk about it, or if they do, they call it fake news. But it's very easy to prove. Also in Serbia, during the genocide in Bosnia as well. Roberts covered this. And to Myanmar, during the genocide against Rohingya. Israel has been supporting every genocide that we actually know of right now. This is not like the claims of anti-Semitism. These are factual-based things that you can look up for yourself. The point is that you say it, and Israel shouts down, controls politics, influences lobbies, and people don't talk about it. It's amazing to me that you could say that about Russia or China, and people wouldn't bat an eye. But you say it about Israel, and you're racist somehow. And sure, there could be an overlap, but it's incredible how well that's worked with how flimsy their propaganda clearly is. It says today it supports oppressive regimes and is allied with ethno-nationalist forces around the globe. One of the most obvious is the Azov movement. They funded and influenced that group for a long time. It was, in fact, created by the CIA going back decades, 1940 something, I believe. And this is a very obvious reality. CIA documents prove it. They've been building this fascist entity for a long time to use at the time against the Soviet Union. Now they're using it against Russia. Israel funds it, even though it's an opium neo-Nazi group. And there's a real interesting contradiction there that you need to understand. It's Zionism lying to you. But it goes on to say, it attacks its neighbors. Oh, the most important part, it is a key source of weapons intelligence and tech to oppressive regimes in every region. So is the United States in a lot of ways. It attacks its neighbors and assassinates foreign officials. Its agents corrupt governments and harass human rights defenders in the West. Still think this is only a Palestinian problem? And this is one of the main reasons we're talking about this in the context of this is not just like right now in the U.S. political discussion, despite our tax dollars predominantly being used to carry out this genocide, and the fact that they're doing this in many ways in the interest of American warfare, or rather vice versa. The point being that Americans in a lot of cases pretend that this is not something we should be talking about for our election. But we have to realize, as I've said before, this is one of the most important issues of our time right now. The realization of what Zionism has done to the world and still does to this moment if we do not stop what's happening. Very important to consider. Now, that all being said, that's why this is important to consider this conversation. So this is coming to right now. The history, which we'll go through a little bit part here and there as we go through this discussion, is obvious. The idea of the terrorist background, the Zionist and how it was created, or Zionism and how it was created and what was used to push this into reality, what we're seeing right now and still taking place as they're currently bombing Lebanon, as they're currently probably bombing multiple places as well, which is what kind of always seems to happen, is randomly bombing Syria, currently bombing Gaza, or starving people as we talk. This was an attack carried out in Lebanon that is to a T a terrorist attack. This is state-sponsored terrorism. There is literally no way around it. Just because the U.S. and Israel scream up otherwise does not change the fundamental reality. I mean, you could make it a simple point to think about. Let's just say the definition of terrorism was somebody shooting a gun. It's not the case, but let's just say to make it easy to understand. Israel then stands up and shoots a gun. And they go, no, because they did this first, or no, because I was holding the different kind of gun, no, because I was holding it at a different angle. It doesn't matter. You still fired the gun. It's terrorism. And that's how this has to be understood. This meets the explicit definition. They have used, whether it's the booby trapping of devices that are out in public areas, which is explicitly against the law and international law, or the idea that this is, excuse me, on the back of their infiltration campaign in regard to civilian locations, or Hezbollah itself, which is not a terrorist organization, the way that they've carried this out in every possible way, or the idea that these people, there's no way they could know if they were in military capacity when this was executed, which also matters. But because they go, well, they're all bad guys, so nobody should care. Isn't that what the other people would say when they bomb in your location? I mean, the point is, it's the only thing they use to make it look like they're not bad is that they're worse. Sounding familiar? They say they're terrorists. They broke the law first. No, they started bombing our areas first, so that way we can bomb their civilians, which is pretty much what you're hearing online right now. So as I've always pointed out, so then you're just the same then. At best, you're just the same. You're just doing it back. So you're just as illegitimate. But it's more than that, because the reality of what's going on with Lebanon or Hezbollah in regard to the illegal areas is very different than what you're being told. To sum that up before, and we'll get to that in a minute in regard to the follow-up and what they're doing in Lebanon after the fact, after this, remember the reality of what's been going on. First, Lebanon is illegally occupied by Israel. That is a fundamental fact in this that we cannot be ignored. Just like with Gaza, locations of Lebanon are currently occupied by Israel. That's an international reality. So, just like with Gaza, they have a legal right to armed resistance. Okay, so then, of course, if they're bombing civilian targets, well, no, that would be a crime. Here's why Israel claims that every single time they're bombing these locations, even though they're not, because that's how they try to hide the fact that what they're doing is, in fact, aiming, one, at illegal occupation areas, illegal settlements by everyone's perspective in the world, and is now even getting more attention in the UN, uncomfortably, because it is a focus all of a sudden. They are calling them settlers, and it is illegal occupation, and everybody knows that. But now Israel's in this bad position of trying to argue that they're under attack while trying to undermine the reality that they're bombing illegal locations. You can't see, there's a whole problem there for them. But the point is, because it's legally occupied, and secondarily, because they've now given their illegal settlers official capacity, those are military targets. That's their dynamic. And that is also a way to look at them using them as human shields. And so as they're bombing these locations, and explicitly, as at least, let's say, to be objective, at least what they're claiming and what Robert would back up, that they're bombing actual military locations, because those also exist in these areas that are supposed to be settlements for people to... It's all the way Tel Aviv and Israel works. Their central location for their military capacity is right in the center of Tel Aviv anyway. All these things I mean, there's even Zionist discussions about how that's kind of the case. So bringing this back to the point, Lebanon has been bombing since this started. It not constantly, but intermittently and in different surges because of what's going on in Gaza. Same with Yemen. Same with many other locations that are simply standing up, specifically the Houthis and Hezbollah, to stand up for Gaza and their self-determination, and have explicitly stated, as I'll read right now, that they would stop the moment that they stop their attacks on Gaza. But they don't want to do that, you see, because they want what they want at the expense of everybody else. So if they really wanted this to stop and get their people back, which is part of that conversation, then they could just stop. They could back away and stop, and it would all end. At least that's what they're promising, and so far they've met pretty much everything they've said they would do, regardless of your opinions about them. Israel has not. So Israel uses the fact that they're bombing illegal locations, which is under international law legal under the 14th Geneva Convention for Armed Resistance, and then they bomb civilian locations, which they do constantly in Lebanon. This took this to a whole nother level. Now we're going to get into why this is so alarming. One, just because of the simple concept of what this means for what they're capable of, but also because of the obvious point of the infiltration of American tech in this country. And how on the record, on the surface of their conversations, largely from people like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, they want the destabilization of the West. If you don't know that, you're not listening. They're telling you these things. They're openly discussing this. And we've also played discussions that are a little more one step removed. So for like rabbis within this conversation arguing that the idea of the migration into Europe and the West is what needs to happen for the end times to come. My point is that is what Ben-Gvir and Smotrich are constantly pointing at. Not some side point, but the reality of the prophecies, of the idea of fulfilling them for their interest. This is not a secret. And it should sound crazy because these people are lunatics. But it is real. And if you just look at their accounts, they're saying it all the time. So that has to be considered in all of this. It has to be considered in how this is playing out and why those things might be used against you and maybe already have. We need to go back to things like 9/11 or go back to many other events or the USS Liberty and how this is not a new or unique event. Your politicians have just hid it from you for your entire life. Now, Robert wrote this on the 18th. Israel carries out large-scale terrorist attacks in Lebanon. It says this Tuesday, less than 24 hours after the Israeli Security Cabinet officially agreed to expand their Gaza war aims, which, so remember, they already argued that the West Bank is now one of their new military focuses, despite that being, shockingly illegal, like everything else. But even Jordan and the United States were the ones saying that West Bank is off limits. Nobody cares. They've shifted in. They've fully engaged war in West Bank. Nobody says a word because those people are either shockingly compromised or already completely in line with what they want to do. Probably both, to be honest. The Blinkens and the Bidens and the rest of them, Trump included, or the Matt Millers, they're just full on supporting this stuff now. But on top of that, Lebanon, they're now explicitly stating is going to be part of their war. And this was always what Robert's been telling you is going to happen. They're trying to force the United States government. I recently saw a clip from Wilkerson saying that from his inside information that the U.S. government, the military specifically, is going, you're on your own. We are not going to jump in with Iran or Lebanon if you make this happen. Now, it's hard to say whether that will flush out or not, but Wilkerson seems to, when he tends to, what he says tends to be the reality in history, what I've seen him say. So either way, they are pushing this either way, regardless. And so they've initiated that. Now, despite at that very moment, the U.S. government standing up, as always, and going, we're trying to de-escalate. Israel said, we want to bring this back. And then they do this. So you have Israel going, we're going to do this. We're going to increase the warfare. We're going to aim at Lebanon. We're going to make and the U.S. lies for them. And then under that lie cover, they make this happen. There's no way to misunderstand. Either you can look at it that the U.S. government is a useful idiot in this conversation, which may be somewhat true, or they're part of it. And I think it's kind of both, but it's really the latter. The U.S. government was aware of this. I think we can prove that and are just now trying to hide that fact. Now it says that they expand their war in Gaza, including stopping Hezbollah by force, is what they claimed. Israel inflicted the worst mass casualty event in Lebanon since the Beirut port explosion. Now, we covered that at the time. In my opinion, I think that's over. We'll get to it. No, I forget where that was. I have it in here somewhere. The point, though, is that was an Israeli attack, in my opinion. Now, really, the evidence, that was what the evidence pointed to. All the lies around it, weirdly enough, were completely satisfactory to all of the governments that were pretending they cared. Just so you understand the story, we're not going to go into depth now, since the point is that the information that was shown, it was reviewed by weapons experts that were like, that's absurd. That these weren't bags of fertilizer, that you guys are, what it really was, I think, still kind of somewhat left up in the air, but the evidence clearly pointed to Israel. And that was in Lebanon, they called that their 9/11. It was a horrifying event. But, they dismissed it and moved on. Yet you have an allegation from Israel and the world stops for 2 days. It's just, we need to, well, I shouldn't even say that. I think we already recognize, I think most people watching this and anybody with a brain and objectivity is already kind of sensing there's a big problem here. He says over 4,000 casualties, which has increased by now, were inflicted simultaneously across Lebanon, indiscriminately wounding men, women, and children, which, by the way, despite all the screeching narratives online, is undeniably proven. Corporate media has covered this. Even Israeli sources have highlighted the fact that children were killed, elderly, women, and in places that there's no way they could have in any way tried to control it, despite their screaming about how discriminate and targeted the whole thing was, because that's all they can do. And importantly, wounding and killing Christians, Muslims, and Druze. All affected by the Israeli decision to rig pagers and secondarily walkie-talkies with amounts of explosives, which does seem to be what ultimately played out, detonating them in many different civilian locations. Now, videos emerged, and I'll play this one in a second for you, from across Lebanon, featuring adults and children thrown to the ground after small explosions ripped flesh from their bodies in packed marketplaces, stores, and in streets. Lebanese hospitals also put out calls for blood donations as the sheer scale of the injured became difficult to deal with all at once. In and of itself might be something right there to look into. You know, what maybe they tainted, I mean, just thinking outside the box. Like I tend to see how Israel has secondary agendas with all this, like with the flooding and Blackwater and the disease aspect. Like this is how they do these things. And they know that people are paying attention. They just don't care. When Western media called it an attack targeting Hezbollah, widely refraining from even blaming Israel, the first victim was a 10-year-old girl. Then, one day later, Israel began detonating walkie-talkie devices that contained even larger explosive charges. These devices exploded inside people's homes, cars, motorbikes, as somebody points out. So you're going to pretend this is discriminate, but yet you blow it up inside of a car, which the point is they didn't even know where these things were, and that car crashes and kills a family of 6. Like the point is that is in no way meeting the necessary metrics to make this a targeted attack or even legal by any stretch of the imagination. Everybody was standing outside of Israel and the U.S. blind support is telling you that. And on top of that, the devices exploded in their homes as well as a funeral procession. And you know what bothers me almost more than anything? The fact that this was the next day and it was at a funeral procession for one of the kids that died in that first attack. At least as the reporting I've seen from these locations is highlighted. The Western media all but applauded these actions, even describing them as movie-style plots or innovative. I mean, it's just sickening, the kind of sycophants we're seeing, the blind support, which it seems like they're going right. This is my point about the opportunism. Just because you see them highlighting the genocide, they fall right back into line when it's needed. The reality of the situation is that Israel just carried out an act of terrorism against Lebanon. If this situation was the other way around, which most people are pointing out, and Hezbollah had managed to rig communication devices belonging to Israeli reservists and high-ranking military officials, then detonating them all, knowing that some of them were in the hands of civilians and that others were carrying them while in a civilian capacity. That's also a point many people aren't pointing out. Let's just say this was a Hamas member in their bed. Killing them in their bed is a crime, whether or not they're a Hamas member, whether or not you call them terrorists. They're not in a military capacity. Just because they don't want that to happen, or because they make up crazy narratives to justify killing them along with their 40 members of their family, because that's how it doesn't change the fact that it's still illegal. At some point, we're all hoping that this eventually fleshes out, which is horrifying to even say out loud, to the point that they will reflect on all of the people they've killed, despite all the lies, because of the UN and all the human rights groups, and everybody was standing other than the United States, highlighting that we don't care what you're saying right now. We all know these are crimes. This has been genocide since day one. We can see what you're doing. You can't collective punishment, bombing 400 people to allegedly try to kill one guy that wasn't there. These are one of these alone should put people in prison. We're talking a year plus. It's just terrifying that this could even continue to happen with the support of all the people screaming that they're the ones leading the rules-based order. Now, again, even if these were all military targets, the point is that they would call it terrorism. That's what Robert's saying in this last point. And if this was pagers explicitly used by only IDF members in active duty, they would still call it a terrorist act, and you know that. It says, knowing that the last point being, it would be instantly labeled as an appalling act of terrorism. Matthew Miller, of course, told journalists at a press briefing that he was not aware of the operation and was not involved. Except we'll go through all the evidence to suggest that's clearly not the case, including an example of the Beirut Medical Center, the American University of Beirut Medical Center, weirdly replacing their pagers 2 weeks before this happened. The truth is, the United States government is standing behind Israel's every move when it comes to their offensive actions against Lebanon, Syria, Iran, Yemen, and all the other regional actors. When Israel bombed Yemen's Hodeidah port and inflicted 90 civilian casualties, which was just bad of it, nobody even cared, the U.S. denied involvement. In June, when Israel managed to take back 4 of its captives while killing a lot more, allegedly held in Gaza's Nusrat refugee camp, killing almost 300 civilians and injuring 700 more with clear U.S. intelligence backing. Washington also claimed it had no idea, it wasn't involved. The evidence proved explicitly otherwise. They don't care. When Israel bombed the consular segment of the Iran embassy in Damascus, I mean, in no way, the point of that one was that there's no way. Republicans were trying to scream how it was not the same. It was a crime of the highest order. No matter who was there, no matter what the concept, this was a embassy building that they bombed. And again, you'd think one of these things might go, okay, we can't, the U.S. government, we can't support that. Nope, doesn't matter. Rules-based order, accept everything they do. And of course, the United States also claimed to have no idea what happened and who even attacked the embassy. More recently, in late June, right after Israeli Prime Minister returned from the U.S. and had delivered a speech about the need for absolute victory over Iran's axis of evil, there are suddenly 2 major provocations in both Iran and Lebanon. Now, what he means by absolute victory, of course, is for his interests, at the expense of literally everybody, including Israelis, as you're seeing them protest in the streets, saying they do not support them, that they are getting their families killed in Gaza, despite how the screeching liars of Eva Klampus and the rest would tell you when they say that, they're speaking to you. No, they're talking to Netanyahu and how their leaders have let them down because they could have brought them home 14 times now and have chosen not to. Their own statements make that clear. He said there are suddenly 2 major provocations in both Iran and Lebanon. First, Israel launches airstrikes into a civilian building in the Lebanese capital, Beirut, killing Hezbollah commander Fouad Shukr, along with women and children, injuring 74. So right there, the argument, was this guy in a military capacity? Is Hezbollah even a terrorist organization in the context that would justify such a bombing, killing innocent people along with him? The point is that this is a political organization. I'm not supporting, just like I would point out how our U.S. military has done horrifying things around the world. Think about the overlap there, guys. Just because there's things they've done bad, which, I mean, my God, look at what the U.S. military's done, does not change the dynamic of what they ultimately are. Is an organization, and in many cases, it's like them calling the Iranian government and military terrorism. It is absurd what's ultimately happening today. They label that anything they want to attack. And so the bottom line here is that when they bomb this guy, even if you want to pretend he's a Hamas, whatever else you want to think is justifiable, along with his family in a location that was not in military capacity is a crime, no matter how they're spending this. But nobody cares in position to do something about it. He says then, hours later, Israel also assassinated the leader of Hamas. You know, the Hamas that Israel funds up until 2020, up until October 7th. 2020 was when the Mossad leader, head of the Mossad, went there to petition Qatar to continue funding Hamas. Just for the person who's right now typing out how that's not true, here's the article for you from 2020. Going forward, it says, then they targeted the leader of Hamas in Iran's capital. In both these cases, the U.S. said it had no idea what had happened, was not informed, and did not take part in it, despite the Biden administration claiming at the time to seek de-escalation when the issue triggered a United Nations Security Council meeting. The U.S. and U.K. chose to both dedicate their time to condemning Iran for stoking regional tensions. I mean, guys, it should make you laugh out loud. Everything they're pointing to are groups they simply claim Iran is backing, or I mean, not backing, because that is the reality. They're backing their right for self-determination. But the idea that they are Iran. Hamas, one of them, despite the obvious provable reality of Israel funding Hamas and the lie about everything. They simply lie to you about these things to justify what they're doing. The idea of Iran stoking tensions, I mean, there's plenty of things I could criticize about Iran, but you show me the same kind of genocide that they're committing in Gaza. You show me the same kind of occupation they have in Syria or Lebanon. You show me the same kind of terrorism they've been carrying out for 75 years. Or how about the United States government? Even if you want to take every claim they've ever made about Iran at face value, it does not even come to a fraction of what these people have done in the world. And yet they want you to believe they're the one. I mean, it's absurd. We should be concerned about every government, is ultimately the point. Now it says the U.S. refused to acknowledge that Israel, of course, was responsible for the assassination in Iran, let alone condemn it, despite it being completely illegal in every sense. Instead, choosing to blame the victims of the aggression and warn them not to take further action. You know, despite every other moment saying Israel has the right to defend itself. And then when the same thing happens, oh, you can't defend yourself. That's a crime. In fact, when the U.S. officials are asked whether Iran has the right to self-defense, I've shown you these clips, they simply refuse to even answer the question. Instead, parroting a line about Tehran funding terrorism because that's the only thing they can do, without any actual evidence to back these things up. Now, it says, it is clear that Tel Aviv does not seek to be the one viewed as initiating the war with Lebanon, and wants to provoke Hezbollah into taking retaliatory measures, which could be interpreted as starting such a conflict. Because, I mean, just you could talk about Wilkerson's point. Maybe they think they can trick them into go, well, we didn't start it. Either way, it's obvious that they know, which is, I mean, militarily, fundamentally provable that they cannot defeat either of these locations, clearly. They need the U.S. basically holding their hand or taking the front. And this is about trying to push them into that position. Every single time, he writes, Israel has attempted to provoke a wider war with Lebanon, Hezbollah has chosen to de-escalate by responding with much tamer attacks than Israel's initial provocations. While Israel has killed nearly 200 civilians in Lebanon just since October 8th, even Hezbollah began firing on military positions along southern Lebanese border. Hezbollah has only killed a handful of Israeli settlers, opting instead to target, guess what, soldiers and military targets. Now, they only hyped how many rockets are flying. You know why? Because what he said there is easily provable. And it's also illegal occupation areas. It's also, whether the even illegal Lebanese areas, illegal settlements in and of themselves. And the bottom line is what they are targeting are those, and you can prove this. But again, come to your own conclusions about it. Simply recognizing that it is illegal and they do have the right to armed resistance, and the civilians they're bombing in Lebanon have been killed. It's unnerving to watch how clear this continues, and you just get the same. I mean, it's obvious. The people supporting them don't care about the law. They don't care about human rights. They don't care about you. They care about their agenda, and clearly that seems to be it. It says it's clear that Hezbollah views its limited military operations against Israeli military targets in the north of occupied Palestine to be achieving their desired goals, serving as a one front in an ongoing war of attrition that has the ultimate goal of securing a victory for the Palestinian resistance groups in Gaza through a ceasefire agreement. And they made this clear. The moment that's done, they're done. They're stopping. So ask yourself, if they really wanted this to stop, then that's what would ultimately happen. Even, again, think about it. They're also telling you in other conversations they do want that deal. They do want their people back. Even Netanyahu is now trying to float some new idea. We'll probably talk about that possibly tomorrow, if not the next show. Or we'll have a pirate stream playing tomorrow. That ultimately we want our hostage back. And we'll even float a deal to pull everybody out. As long as Hamas leaves, we'll end this whole thing. Okay, well then, there you go. They're offering it, but you don't want that. Not true. Now it says, however, we have now entered a new phase of the war, he writes. Israel is now officially announcing Lebanon is within its scope of the war, and that the goal of returning some 100,000 Israelis who have fled their settlements near the Lebanese border will only be achieved through force. Okay, so all he said right there is these illegal settlements that are illegal in everyone's mindset, the world around, the UN has been calling this out during these faux conversations they're having as Israel just calls everyone racist. And they're simply going, our goal is to put those people back in those illegal settlements. How is this the conversation right now? Because the people leading this are completely illegitimate criminals. The U.S. government, everyone supporting this knows that's illegal. And now you're going to allow them to fight a war against a foreign country to make sure those illegal settlements can be put back in place? Yep. It's pretty crazy. Now it says Hezbollah has made its position crystal clear. It does not seek a full-scale war. Of course, you could say they're lying, but their actions pretty much back this up, and is providing a support role to Gaza. The Secretary General of Hezbollah has repeatedly said that if Israel signs that ceasefire agreement and prisoners exchange with Hamas, they will immediately stop all their operations, as well as Ansarallah in Yemen. They vowed to stop. They'll move their blockade. They will stop if they simply stop their genocide. Think about how crazy that is. And they just say no. Yet Israel's rulership is not interested in signing a ceasefire and does not really care about returning its captives alive. Instead, it seeks an impossible total victory. And again, at the expense of everybody, including their own people. The Israeli military has already invaded every single area of the Gaza Strip and has failed to defeat Hamas or return its captives. So now it's turning its focus to Lebanon. Always a great article from Robert. Include this for you as well so you remember who funds Hamas. Now, Dan Cohen pointed this out on the 17th. Now, kind of keep this chronological, but we jump around a little bit. But so this is on the 17th. He says, Israel is pushing for the U.S. to join an all-out war against Lebanon and Iran. Overnight, Netanyahu added to the list of goals the safe return of citizens to their homes near the border. Right, again, putting people back in their illegal occupation, which serves as their human shield buffer. Hours later, thousands of beepers exploded in Lebanon in a massive terrorist attack targeting Hezbollah fighters and civilians alike. The close associate of Netanyahu, Topaz Luke, credited Israel for the attack quickly before deleting his post. It's already out, by the way. They've already publicly accepted that, probably because they, just like always, are never really in control of their narratives, and somebody dumped it out there, so they accept. Either way, the point is Israel has accepted and stated they did this. An Israeli group called Fighting for the North credits Israel for the attack and demands Netanyahu launch a full-scale war on Lebanon. He says, quote, "We expect this to be the opening blow of a war in the north and not another one-off operation, however impressive it may be. This is an opportunity that must not be missed under any circumstances." So Israel's definitely pushing for all-out war. The Biden administration, as he writes, is a ghost ship, and I argue it would be almost worse. Either way, both sides are going to continue supporting this. Will Jake Sullivan, he asked, or whoever is running the foreign policy, agree to a full war against Lebanon and Israel? Wilkerson seems to think the Pentagon, at the very least, is saying no, but that's not necessarily the only thing that matters. Are Americans ready to die in World War III, he says, to protect Netanyahu from criminal prosecution and keep genocidal Israel from collapsing? I know in my heart for sure that the majority of conservatives and liberals, the majority of this country does not believe that. But the partisanship, two-party paradigm, the team sport politics very much does. Now, here's a video of the marketplace. Just one of the early videos to show you this is one of the many examples of what we saw. It's obvious there's a lot of civilians in this location. Women, children, men. It goes off and hurts people who are just in the vicinity. Now, to add a point that people have highlighted, and we should obviously question everything, everything, guys. But some people are arguing that we should at least ask, that this entire thing was a big facade, which is certainly possible. But for me, it's hard to wrap my mind around how that makes sense in the context of why Lebanon would be talking about, but certainly question that. I just want to include that because I've seen people bring that up, that maybe this whole thing was, like anything, but it's hard. If you got more evidence of that, I would love to see that. That's fascinating to me, but I don't think that adds up for me. Now here is what Tim Anderson posted. Here's a gentleman discussing his opinion around what the absurdity of all of this, as it's called the Israeli Motorola massacre.
Israel planted explosives on pagers and detonated them remotely in a wide range of Lebanese civilian spaces, including grocery shops, busy city streets, medical facilities. And since the media is not reporting this accurately, I thought I'd just clarify very quickly that this is the definition of state-sponsored terrorism, and the U.S. is busy legitimizing the cyber terror attack. Again, Israel detonated thousands of bombs in Lebanon knowing that this will harm and kill children, civilians, medics, and passersby who are just going about their daily lives in markets and on the street. This is terrorism. Imagine if another country remotely blew up tons of devices inside Israel and killed a bunch of people.
Or think about it like this. This jumped into my head. How about the idea of the U.S. government, right? Okay, well, hypothetically, the U.S. government's currently occupying Syria, right? What if Syria, from a government perspective, like the Syrian military decided to do this, but only targeted U.S. military personnel in Syria, which I don't want to happen. I don't want anybody to be hurt. But the reality being that would be that would be a attack on an occupied force, the legal armed resistance against the military illegal occupation of Syria. and then only targeting military personnel. Quite, I mean, look, it doesn't even matter about occupation. I mean, it does, but the bigger point is the U.S. government clearly invaded Syria. That's Syrian territory, so they have the right to fight back. That's actual self-defense. What's crazy though is you already know. You don't need me to tell you. They would call it a terrorist attack against the United States government. You know that. So the point is to think about this in the broader context of how it would apply almost anywhere else except in this one. And the big question, obviously, is why do you think that is?
The U.S. would, I mean, you know what they do.
In general, yes, of course we support operations to target Hezbollah militants who continue to launch terrorist attacks against civilians. Israel has a right to defend itself.
Again, that's the mantra. I argue the evidence suggests otherwise. I only say that to be objective because obviously I'm not there, but the evidence that we can see, and I put a lot of weight on what Robert says and what his research shows. The point being that does not appear to be what we're talking about, including the fact that if you really look at it in the bigger sense, that they're only seemingly targeting the illegal occupied areas, and those have been given official capacity. So what are we talking about? Those are military targets.
Against terrorism and a right to carry out legitimate attacks against terrorists, not civilians, but terrorists. So as a general proposition, yes, of course.
Okay, so let me take you back to the legitimacy of targets and so on. Yesterday, a group of settlers attacked a school in Jericho. They beat up the students, they broke their bones, they beat up the teachers and so on. Mm-hmm. Are they a legitimate target? Should they be a legitimate target by the same kind of definition in which you have defined the other targets?
Of course, he goes on to just completely just sidestep the question and act, well, Israel will look into that. No, they've given them official capacity. And it's a shocking video if you haven't seen it. They literally storm, it's a school. They're children, well, from like 18 all the way down to younger. And they go in there with big sticks and just start beating people up. Why? Because they hate Palestinians. It's as simple as that. And nobody cares. In fact, usually they've got IDF support to back them up against the unarmed civilians. This is the reality. Now, in regard to the U.S. being involved, you might find this quite interesting. Expat Vibes highlights this. The U.S. State Department says that they were not involved. In unrelated news, the American University of Beirut Medical Center replaced the pagers of their doctors and staff 2 weeks ago, which is completely verifiable. And so what's interesting about this, and this is just one side point, it's obvious to me the U.S. government was very aware of what's going on here for many obvious, strategic reasons. But we need to really ask about whether or not this is an example of the U.S. government facilitating the act, working with them, allowing this. Now, it's also possible Israel could have used this relationship like it does all the time. It takes advantage of these mindless politicians constantly and laughs about it on video, and they still don't change. So that has to tell you something. I did get this one. Hold on. I think I'll get to that in a minute. The point is he denies knowing anything. That's what the video there is. And so overall, it's clear that the U.S. government played a role in this, I would say. Now, Mary Kostakaitis points out an important discussion from New York Times. Here's the article if you want to check it out for yourself. American officials tell the New York Times it was Israel, which shouldn't be shocking because that's pretty public now. But guess what? That was on the 17th. So here you got Matt Miller standing up and going, oh, hey, we don't know. We weren't involved at all. Yet, weirdly enough, U.S. officials, before we even acknowledge who was involved and who were responsible, are going, it was Israel. We know because how do they possibly know that? So she simply points at the clear deductive logic. So the U.S. knew about the pagers and injuries and deaths of civilians that would result. New York Times, Israel planted explosives in pagers that Hezbollah had bought and then triggered them with fake messages, American and other officials said. So my point would be not just that it happened and they were involved, but they knew details. They had pagers that they did and how they did. Okay, so how would they possibly know that if Matt Miller, who's supposed to be on the inside, is going, we don't know yet? Because they were involved. And that's how clumsy this is right now. I just think they're acting with impunity. I don't think they care. Hopefully we can prove they're wrong as they end up in jail cells for murdering innocent people. Here's what Kirby had to say about this. And guys, this is painful. This one in particular, by the way, what Matt Miller does, just no comment, like very eerily showing you how much they're involved.
Sources have confirmed to us, it's been widely reported that Israel is responsible for this, but notably you still won't say that. Why is that? Is it because that's not your assessment, or because you don't support what they're doing here?
It's because I don't have anything more to add on this issue, as I said.
That's kind of what you're going to get the whole time. Just not a yes or no, like just very very like legally speaking, like we're not going to give you anything. How do you not take that as you're clearly criminal? You're, either you're covering for them or you're clearly criminally involved. I mean, it's not, that's my opinion, but you tell me what you think. How do you answer like this, both of them, without you knowing, again, at a time when even the corporate media is telling them that Israel's involved? We know that, everyone's talking about it, and they're like, no comment. We won't get, we don't, nothing right in the middle.
Is it because that's not your assessment, or because you don't support what they're doing here?
It's because I don't have anything more to add on this issue. As I said, there was no U.S. involvement, and I'm not going to go beyond that today.
You know what jumped in my head right now? What I think is because I don't think this is over. I think this is an ongoing agenda, and that actually makes much more sense to me now that they don't want to give any details at all because this is not over yet. That's my opinion, but pretty eerie.
These kinds of tactics, blowing up pagers and walkie-talkies, is this type of warfare acceptable to the United States?
Again, Mary, I appreciate the question. I'm simply not going to be able to address these incidents over the last couple of days in any...
But see, that's not about the incident. That's about a broad question. Like if I were in that room, I'd frame it differently. Like hypothetically speaking, if I were to use somebody's cell phone to blow them up, the government did, would that be a crime? They'll still won't answer the question. Even though it's obviously a broad question that you would be able to answer. It's not about Israel. It's about the premise of what actually happened. Why? Because the crime. They know it's a crime. These are the rules-based order. These are the good guys fighting for freedom and liberty. Come on, guys. We can't be this blind. And I'm speaking specifically to those that think these people are going to lead you to some kind of new position, whether left or right.
Level of detail one way or another.
Okay, let me try one other thing.
Please.
Everyone keeps urging, all parties involved not to escalate this. Isn't this an escalation already? I mean,
yes.
Isn't this Israel doing exactly what you've been warning them not to do?
Again, I'm not going to speak to the details of these incidents. I understand that's frustrating. I get it. And I understand where all your questions are coming from. They're all valid. They're all fair.
Oh, so it's all good because Kirby understands. Thank God.
I'm just not going to get into this. I will add, if I could, and restate a little bit to what I said to Gabe. We still don't want to see an escalation of any kind. We don't believe...
All that means is Iran, you're not allowed to do it. You can't fight back, or Lebanon, or whatever we're talking about. It's because the point is they did the same thing to Iran last time, right? They bombed him. They bombed their capital. They assassinated Leo. You can't. You better not. That'd be a crime. It's on its face embarrassingly hypocritical, and everyone can see that. You don't just get to say, well, we deem you bad guy, therefore these don't apply. All that shows you is the same old narrative. The rules for me, not for rules for thee, not for me, right? You are acting like you just get to, they act with impunity. Simple as that. That's what criminals do.
That the way to solve where we're at in this crisis is by additional military operations at all. We still believe that the best way to prevent escalation, to prevent another front from opening up in Lebanon, is through diplomacy, which is why Mr. Hochstein was over.
Hold on. What do you say there?
The way to solve a little bit to what I said to Gabe. We still don't want to see an escalation of any kind. We don't believe that the way to solve where we're at in this crisis is by additional military operations.
Okay, how do you take that at face value when they're literally still arming Israel in exactly that against Lebanon or Gaza or anything else they're doing? They're literally screaming about how they're going to make this. They're broadening their war focus. And here he is going, we don't think more military action is the right path. But all he's doing is saying, Iran, Lebanon, you can't do that. But we'll let Israel do it. We'll act like we stick our nose up at it, but we'll keep giving them weapons and arms and lying about what they do. This is a dumpster fire. It is so incredibly crazy that we're at this point. And again, I've said this many times, but I don't know how... The only people that are going along with this are people that have an interest in maintaining this narrative, maintaining the status quo, blindly supporting Israel, or some kind of partisan narrative. Like literally the rest of the world is like, how in the world are we still pretending this? How is this still happening? Now, again, that you may think, look into it for yourself. Because in my opinion now, it's very clear. And I don't know what the percentage is, but I mean, it's clear to me that the vast majority of people, countries, organizations are all pretty obviously pointing this stuff out right now. Even Israelis are pointing this out. And here we are. Just keep lying about it.
At all. We still believe that the best way to prevent escalation, to prevent another front from opening up in Lebanon, is through diplomacy, which is why Mr. Hochstein was over in the region this week. And we're still going to pursue those kinds of outcomes.
Well, just to begin with, in general, what does the U.S. know about what happened? There have been a series of deaths and injuries, apparently from exploding pagers. Was the U.S. have any knowledge? What does it know now, and when did it know about what has happened?
So we are gathering information on this incident. I can tell you that the U.S. was not involved in it. The U.S. was not aware of this incident in advance, and at this point, we're gathering information.
So Robert made fun of this because think about how dumb that is. So we're going to pretend that you're just like you're framing yourself as one of the journalists. We're just trying to find out. Really? So you're arming them and don't even know what's going on? Like either that's really embarrassing or they're lying. It's probably partly both.
And what information have you gathered so far?
We'll continue to collect information. I don't have any public readout to give now, but we're collecting information in the same way that journalists are across the world.
See? We're just like you. It's pretty pathetic.
To gather the facts about.
Just wanted to pin down some of the basics again on the exploding pages. I mean, is it still your position that you are not saying publicly who you believe carried out these attacks?
I don't have any comment on it at all.
And is there any reason that you wouldn't say what your assessment is of who carried these out?
I just don't have any comment on it at all.
Okay.
God, I mean, that's just creepy to me. The smile, everything. Just nothing. Move on. No more. We're not talking, I mean, that's, to me, that's more important than actually his fake answers. That's wild. Now, Fiorella Isabel highlights the New York Times, pointing out on the 18th, mind you, while they're still pretending we don't know, Israel planted explosives and pagers sold to Hezbollah. Now, that's the way they framed this. The reality, as far as I can tell, this was much more broad and indiscriminate than Hezbollah pagers, which I'll make a point about. These were just pagers, in my opinion, that were given out to people that, you could argue that they were maybe what they perceived to be Hezbollah and Hezbollah tangential people. At the end of the day, there's more than enough evidence to show that there were plenty of just random people that had these things. And she writes, breaking Israeli sources admit responsibility for attacks on devices in Lebanon, saying their attack is phase 2 of Israeli intelligence op against Hezbollah and their comms network. New York Times claims Israel planted explosives in recent batch of Taiwanese-based pagers, and we'll get to this. There's important information to understand about what this group is, and that will segue into the conversation about why we need to care so much about these Israeli startups that are simply fronts for Israeli intelligence. Now, the second one, Lebanon's rocked again by exploding devices as they declare a new phase of the war. These are the walkie-talkies they're discussing. And here, Megatron simply shows you one of these. I'll show you a quick video about this. Japanese-made ICOM walkie-talkies began exploding in Lebanon. Around 100 people have been injured. Now, as much as there is still we'll touch on this explicitly, the point about the concern about our devices right now, which I'm right there with you and concerned about how far this may be reached. But to be clear, this appears to have been something that was started 5 months ago. And so that's one of the easiest points to show there's no way they could have known where these things ended up. They could have been anywhere in the world. They could have been in the United States by now, for all we know. They could have been in Israel, for all we know. And the point is that it's indiscriminate on its face. Now, here is apparently this is the Japanese company that makes those walkie-talkies, who's basically investigating the reality and making sure people know that they weren't involved, or at least saying that. And all it goes forward is the company whose name is on the walkie-talkies that blew up on Wednesday are investigating. And it shows you these walkie-talkies, and it says ICOM, the manufacturer in Osaka, Japan, says it discontinued this specific device a decade ago. That's pretty interesting. And he says, I have a picture of the device that exploded. The hologram sticker should be here. The fact that the sticker is not on here means we cannot determine if it's genuine. He says the fact that the sticker, which isn't on the ones that were used. And it says the ICOM says that it sells products only to authorized distributors following Japan's regulations. We have a robotic production line that's very fast. And so right there, you could argue there's a point of infiltration potentially. or any number of these things, the distribution lines. My point is to think about how Israel influences or infiltrates the tech field out there today. How exactly did they get in this? I mean, it's certainly possible they just found old versions of these, like he's saying, or bought them up before and used this on a side project. But it also could have been something where they infiltrated the actual company. Or you can't make sure you're considering all the possibilities, because this is a real thing, guys. This is not some kind of a hypothetical discussion. This happened, so we have to consider what the real extent of this might be. And he simply says, and so there's no time to set an explosive device. So his point is it didn't happen in their factory. So that's what he's saying. Because of how fast it goes, it wouldn't have been possible. Good point. And he says, oh, that was the last part. So he's just pointing out they weren't involved. Now, OSINT Defender is simply highlighting what Sky News said. So I think it's important to just be skeptical about all of these, but simply pointing out that Mossad was able to inject a compound, and they're claiming, obviously, in sources from Israel, about what I think it's, just the acronym is PETN, into specifically the batteries of new encrypted pagers. But the point was, at least with the walkie-talkies, that they were old. So the question on the pagers is a different dynamic, right? But so they're claiming that they were new, or rather, I guess, at least new to the people that were using them, and that Hezbollah began using around February before they even arrived in the hands of the members. They're claiming only Hezbollah, but again, that's not the reality. It's obvious these were in the hands of plenty of innocent people, allowing them to remotely overheat and detonate the lithium battery within the device. Now, that's interesting, though, because I don't know if I believe that fully picture, because if it was overheating, why was it simultaneous? Why was it the text messages that caused it? Maybe it was the message that triggered the overheating. These are important questions to ask. But the point is that they gave, or overlapping with the walkie-talkie. How do these things line up? Were the walkie-talkies, if they were 10 years old, how did they end up in their hands? The pagers were delivered, but there's a lot of anomalies to this, which is another reason why you might want to question the validity of the larger story. Now, getting into the important part of this around the company behind it, Freddie Ponton did excellent work on this. And this again, getting into the startup nation, the startup Israeli Unit 8200 intelligence overlap startups being seeded around the world. And we're going to get to the most important part today, coming back to an article Whitney wrote for TLAV, The Prince and the Spy, discussing this very point about their own statements of how they infiltrate these fields. Israel blurs the line between defense apparatus and local cybersecurity hub. That's 2018. We'll come back to that. Now, Freddie writes, the startup company, Norta Global, registered in Bulgaria, finds itself involved with the killer pagers. The capital of only BGN 200, just above $100, was transferred to the Hungarian DSK bank, I believe that's Denmark, right, by the 39-year-old lawyer in Sofia, Atanas V., citing the legislature, the court case in April 2002. Now, I think DSK applies to just Hungary, right? But tell me, I think that's what that stands for. The DSK, I believe, is that. Let me know in the chat just so we can clarify that. And it says the balance sheets of the company were more than modest until someone poured $1.6 million into the startup. Now, this is an example of simply co-opting other startups, which is also part of this dynamic. But he posted this on the 19th, 6:43 a.m. This one goes back to a little like an hour before that. And he's simply pointing out the Norta Global Limited in Sofia, Bulgaria, another empty shell used by Israeli intelligence. And we'll flesh this out. But he says, this is the other post that he tweet quotes, sorry, can't talk right now. The killer pagers in this thread, he writes, Israel's Mossad spy agency planted a small number of these explosives inside the thousands of pagers sold in Lebanon months before. Images of the destroyed devices showed a format and stickers consistent with the AR-924 model of pagers and Gold Apollo branding. However, the firm's founder said the devices were actually made under license with Budapest firm. And now this is where it's important to realize that they took over this company and then produced these things using old models, I guess, which is what we're seeing from the Japanese company, or excuse me, that's the walkie-talkie. In the case here, we're still talking about the models that they're using to produce. And they're simply saying it was the actual owner here, or the, where did I miss it? It says CEO, the founder, Husu Ching Kwang, said the devices were actually made under license at Budapest by a firm called BAC Consulting using Gold Apollo name, right? So the illusion of being through this company, but really being a secondary kind of, what do you call that? What's the term for that? I can't remember the term. Like if you open a restaurant and then you open like a secondary version of it, but you're not part of the main company. God, I can't remember the names. But so either way, the point is that it's under the illusion they're that company, but they're clearly not. And it says BAC Consulting was created by Barbara Chamberlain in Chicago in 2000. Barbara grew up in Michigan. Yeah, I'm just jumping through but this is important to read, but ultimately I wanted to try to keep this show reasonably shorter than usual. Barbara Chamberlain, profile on LinkedIn. You can check it out for yourself. Here's her image. This is Christina, actually. One of BAC's Consulting's many projects was bridging technology and innovation from Asia. The aim of this project was to develop international technology cooperation among countries for the sale of telecommunication products. This is all building into the major point. I'm just trying to jump through this for you. Franchise, thank you for the chat. Franchise I was talking about. Now, he ultimately leaves this up in the air, but the point was, as he comes through, which we'll get to in a second, is that this is, in fact, an Israeli company, but we'll come back to that. Mariam Barghouti, so keeping in mind at this point, he's talking about simply the idea that we have the connection, a company that is being used kind of secondarily to produce these things. Mariam Barghouti points out that according to Lebanese security sources, the explosive devices that resulted in the injuries of thousands in Lebanon today and in Syria, she wrote this on the 17th, and the killing of at least 9, including children, were imported 5 months ago. Implanted up to 20 grams of explosive material. This means this was premeditated and pre-planned months ago by Israel. Now, but the reality of this is outside of Israel as well. Now, that could show you simply the breadth of how not discriminate this was, that some of these found their way outside of the location, or that it was not planned, not aimed at anything in particular, but the bottom line is that it killed civilians. And it was planned so long ago that there's no way they could have known where these would end up. Not entirely. Now, here is a doctor you're familiar with, Dr. Abu Sita. We've talked about him in the past. He was in Gaza for a while and was telling you what he was seeing, and it was horrifying. Here he is dealing with people hurt in the Beirut. And it's the same thing. It's the lies that we're hearing. It's the reality, just in contrast to the lies we're hearing from Israel. As he says, almost all the victims will end up with some permanent disabilities, and we are talking about civilians here.
Who have you been dealing with, and how have they been? And if you can, paint us a picture of the type of injuries of the survivors are dealing with, and what you're doing in the theatre, because you've come out of theatre. I see you're ready to go back in again. Paint a picture of what's going on inside the hospital.
So these pagers went off randomly. Some people were in their car in confined spaces. Some people were sitting next to some of the wounded. Some of them were in the house when they exploded. And so what you have is a different kind of collection of people of all ages, men and women, who've come in with that blast injury. The catastrophic thing is that almost all of them will end up with some residual disability, some permanent disability. The hands, overwhelming majority, have been mangled with a lot of amputations. And a lot of the shrapnel has gone into the eyes with almost loss of eyesight, complete in one eye and some, unfortunately, in both eyes.
Right. So the reason that's the point, both hands and eyes seem to be one of the big, they obviously the pager went off and they bring them up and look at it. Right. And so the hands and the eyes seem to be the focal point of most of the damage. Some of them are on their hip and their side and so on. But some of the art claims, we're going to get into the responses from the politicians, both U.S. and otherwise, or supposed journalists. The responses make me sick. Laughing about this. We'll get into it. Randy Fine, for example, the big MAGA hero that Trump supports, openly yet again going, good, keep going, take their eyes. Like, this guy is an absolute monster. He is a U.S. politician. It's openly endorsed by Donald Trump, and that's scary to me. Asal Rod points out non-combatants were also drawn into the fray. This is from the New York Times. The New York Times is trying really hard to avoid saying Israel killed civilians, because that's what it means. Drawn into the fray. What is this, a field of war now? We're talking about civilian locations and markets. People were murdered by exploding devices in civilian locations. And the best they can do is, but non-combatants were drawn in? It's disgusting. As well as the BBC, she says half the death toll are children and medical staff. Half. Killing civilians in random explosions will be called terrorism if anyone else did it, but when it's Israel, they call it Hezbollah pager explosions. That's what BBC points out. And again, even in their own article, including 2 children and 4 healthcare workers. Michael Tracy points out another article. All these are very public. You could look these up for yourself. Fatima was in the kitchen on Tuesday when a pager on the table began to beep, her aunt said. Two women, by the way. She picked up the device and to bring it to her father. Hold on. Oops. There we go. To bring it to her father and was holding it when it exploded, mangling her face and leaving the room covered in blood. Fatima was trying to take courses in English. She loved English. Tracy says this is what happened to a 9-year-old girl who was killed in Lebanon because of the pager attack. Such incredible technological innovation. Couldn't be more impressed. He's obviously being sarcastic. Now, of course, what do you get from the Israeli Zionist disgusting terrorist mentality right now? Well, then he shouldn't have been a Hezbollah terrorist because you've proven that? You don't even know who they're talking about. The point is that at the end of the day, the narrative is vomited over the top of anything, including innocent people being killed, because they don't care. Owen Jones says if Hezbollah blew up the phones and pagers of Israeli reservists, inevitably killing and maiming children and bystanders, those cheering on Israel now would be denouncing an obscene act of terrorism. Everybody knows that. And it says anyone publicly cheering on in the West would be liable for arrest. But not with this, not with the reverse. I mean, that's what we're seeing. People being arrested both by the whatever administration's in place if you dare point out crimes of Israel. Francesca Albanese highlighting with the Limken Institute. Now, early on in this genocide, even Netanyahu and other Israeli leaders pointed to the Limken Institute and Limken, quote, making arguments about why they were doing the right thing. Here's the Limken Institute, which, by the way, already spoke out very early saying they were committing genocide, saying the Limken Institute condemns Israel's terrorist attacks against Lebanese people in the past 2 days. And this is why they've tried to point to them early. They're the Limken Institute for Genocide Prevention. And they're calling it genocide. It says, and not this, but obviously what's going on in Gaza. And it says, using explosive pagers and walkie-talkies, it has killed 29 Lebanese people, wounded at least 3,200, including 9-year-old Fatima and an 11-year-old boy. While supporters of Israel claim that all victims were terrorists, because that's what they always do, that claim does not appear to be borne out of the evidence, as always. Certainly, a 9-year-old and an 11-year-old were not terrorists. Hezbollah, the ostensible target, in quotes, of the attacks, because there really wasn't a target, it seems, is not a simple terrorist organization engaged in criminal activity. As much as they don't like that narrative we talked about, and U.S. and Israel will scream otherwise, it's an objective reality. Same with Ansar Allah or the Houthis. They're not what they pretend they are. I'm not saying that makes them everything they do good, just like the U.S. military point I said before. But they are not. I mean, look, you want to compare terrorist actions? Compare it to what Zionism has done in its entire existence, or the U.S. military, or compare it to the ISIS or Al-Qaeda, which the U.S. government and Israel fund and support and give medical treatment to. You won't even find a fraction of what they're talking about. And it says, it is also a political party and service provider for southern Lebanon, because that's true. It also includes civilian doctors, nurses, teachers, and so forth. Isn't that important? Right? I mean, this is like saying you're bombing or attacking UNRWA because you claim they're Hamas and saying it doesn't matter because they're all bad guys. The point is Hezbollah does, in fact, have other aspects of its dynamic. Not all of them are the military wing, and they don't care. So even if you don't like Hezbollah or think all of them are bad, there is military capacity under the law, and that doesn't apply. And everybody was standing is telling you that, other than the people blindly supporting Israel. When does collateral damage become the point? They ask. It says, what we see is a genocide state that is completely out of control and supported by a Western world that is, in their opinion, in large measure too racist and Islamophobic to care. Now, I don't know if I necessarily agree with that by and large. I would say that the ruling conversation is presenting a lot of that. But at the end of the day, I don't believe most people feel that way. That's my opinion, though. It says, since yesterday's, well, I would add, too, though, that's hard for the outside entity to see that, right? Because they're only seeing through the lens of propaganda, just like we are. But it says, what we see is a genocidal, next one, it says, since yesterday's attacks, Israel has declared a new phase in its hopeless and destructive, quote, war. We call on all nations, the Limken Institute, of moral conscience and sanity to intervene immediately to stop this slaughter of Arab peoples before the whole world is drawn down into the breathtaking moral collapse and darkness that we all see before our eyes. That is powerful. My point is, I think we all know that everyone feels this way. What are we going to do about it? The genocide of Palestinians must stop. Israel's international escalation and expansion of violence must stop. Since the UN is weak and the West is complicit, a concerted intervention for peace and justice must be made by the broad coalition from the global South. Of course, that's going to really bother the people that act like that's, look, we should be skeptical of all of them. I'm not necessarily saying one group over the other should take control of anything. But the reality is that people that have conscience or care about people's lives need to stand up and push back against the power structures that are keeping it going. So agree with them in that dynamic or not. The reality ultimately in their mind seems to be that they think that entity will help stop this. It doesn't necessarily have to mean they think that will bring some rising tide of freedom to the world. I don't even agree with that. But the point is, without such an effort, regional and global war are not far off, and the wanton slaughter of all mankind will rule the day once more. It's a good point, and it's sad because I think a lot of people will ignore it. She just simply quotes one of the parts there. Francesca Albanese, you are rapporteur. Now, Tiberius points out, and this is in response, essentially, but we're starting with it, to all the people we'll cover next. Despite the reality, and I mean like the provable evidence that everyone is engaging with, even the corporate media for crying out loud, that this was indiscriminate, and that children and women were killed. Most everybody that is in a position to support Israel is just bleeding that it was the most, and how many times do I say this? The most discriminate targeted attack in the history of warfare in every universe that's ever existed. Like, ridiculous. Instead of simply saying, no, it was not indiscriminate, you have to go so far over the top to make people feel uncomfortable. Like with the starving. No, we're not starving them. They've got more food than they've ever had in their history. That's things that Elon Levy says, which we'll point at. Instead of just saying, no, we're feeding them like we're supposed to, they make it cartoonish. And maybe there's a reason, maybe they're just that clumsy. Like I've said before, this is what it looks like to acknowledge a power structure that did not earn what it has. But this is what Tiberius says. This is what this was. It's a quote. This was actually a precision attack only targeting specific military personnel. We keep hearing these. Now that even would be a more measured response. That no, we just targeted military. And that would be what I would expect from the propaganda in reverse. But you're going to see some of the most cartoonish responses in any context. And Tiberius says, of course it wasn't, you bumbling mess of regurgitated propaganda and bile. There's no way to control where thousands of pagers, for 5 months, mind you, were going to be at the time of detonation. This was the opposite. Here's David Frum. The most precisely targeted anti-terrorist operation in the history of the world. I mean, see my point? Why not just say that it wasn't discriminate? You're lying about that. You have to go so far over to make yourself look like an absolute moron. No, these are just people that are blindly and I think desperately in the interest of supporting Zionism. The most targeted in the history of the world, despite the fact that it wasn't targeted and killed lots of women and children, half, in fact, medical workers and women and children, half. I mean, it needs to be insulting to your intelligence. You need to point these things out. Here is Elon Levy, highlighting Petra de Sutter, who says, I strongly condemn the attack because it was a crime in every sense of the word, which injured thousands of people, a brutal escalation of violence. Silence is not an option. An international investigation is called for. This is, what is that, Germany? I can't read let me see real quick. Get the translation. Or not. Oh, enterprises, publics, and what does that say right there? Let me do this. There we go. That says, that doesn't even translate. Is that, it's not coming up. What's that flag right there? Let me know in the chat so I don't mispronounce it or misannounce it. But in any case, the point is she's simply calling it out like she sees it. And I completely agree with that. And she's got the great check mark. So it's a government thing. Her point that what Elon Levy says is beyond parody. This guy is such a clown. Like, I can't wait for a time when this guy has to revel in what he built for himself here. You're flaming dumpster fire of a propaganda network that you think is influencing people, but you're getting bots and morons to support you. The point is, I don't believe even these numbers we see. But either way, he says beyond parody, the most surgical, targeted, precise counter-terror operation in history against an enemy army that's been waging a war of aggression for 11 months. Oh, you mean Zionist Israel? No. Lebanon. They just want dead Jews. Oh, you couldn't resist, right? You got to throw in the racist point because what else? I mean, guys, this is a cartoon. Like, somebody really needs to, people have already done that. Made, little skits or whatever. It's so embarrassing. These people think that they're influencing anybody other than people that already buy their lies. It's not indiscriminate. But you couldn't just say that. You have to make it the most surgical, targeted, precise thing we've ever seen in the history of any civilization, anywhere, any universe ever existing. You know what it sounds like to me? The same thing Trump does all the time. The complete hyperbolic extreme. You know, it's embarrassing. Here he is again, because that's what this guy's job is, obviously. Mark Owen Jones is attacking personal devices in a manner that harms thousands and kills numerous civilians. It's a terror attack. Pretty objective. That's pretty basic. Doesn't matter who does it, right? He says it was literally, what's funny, well, anyway, he goes, it was literally an attack on personal devices given only to operatives of the terror organization, which is fundamentally not true. In many cases, you can prove the exact opposite is the case. But on top of that, if you have a 5-month gap before doing so, there's no way you could know where those would end up. On top of that, there are other people than military in Hezbollah, medical workers, aid workers. That doesn't matter, though, because you guys lie about everything. It says that's the definition of a targeted counter-terror attack. Counter-terror attack? I don't think he understood what that means. I think he thought he meant counter-terror operation. He's a counter-terror attack. This guy is such a moron. Is a terror attack. What he meant to say was a counter-terror operation. If you say counter-terror attack, you're responding with terrorism. I mean, how can they have ever influenced anybody? These people are jokes. But the bottom line is that it's not a counter anything. You're carrying out a terrorist attack. You're not responding. You're not defending. This isn't you're defending for the rest of your life in the way they frame these things. But make sure we recognize that. I didn't pick up on that earlier. That's embarrassing. I hope other people make fun of that. And I simply said lying as usual and gave him the Wilkerson clip and the actual video showing civilians get bombed, which, I don't think I showed you this. It might be next. It's just a market, or a little workspace where you got a woman, you got a child, you got a man, and it just blows up. And they all run out. You know, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. The evidence is all over the place. Here, another one from Mark Owen Jones. He says, why do IDF spokespeople love to brag about indiscriminate maiming and killing? And he says, why do some people call, quote, indiscriminate what is literally, he just can't resist, the most discriminate counter-terror attack in history? Again, this guy's ridiculous. Impossible to be more targeted than this. You see, you can't let it go. How is it impossible to be more targeted than this? So you're telling me you couldn't carry an attack on one individual that's a terror suspect and kill him, and that wouldn't be more targeted? Well, obviously it would. So you're wrong. And you know that because all it is hyperbolic screaming out of absolute desperation because your entire world is collapsing. Zionism is falling apart. The state of Israel is collapsing because of what you've done, and you're hurting everybody, including yourselves. So keep being desperate. I mean, there's one sliver of positivity in this is that these people are probably feeling very uncomfortable. On top of that the world is seeing what they really are. And I'm talking about Zionists, of course, as always, despite all the people that would love to misrepresent everything people say. But here's Emily Schrader doing what they always do. Okay, so hopefully it's clear that these things were indiscriminate. I mean, it shouldn't matter that corporate media says. I mean, the point is that when corporate media says it's interesting because usually they're the ones bolstering the narrative. So it's being said clearly around the world that these things were in people's hands that were random civilians, or like we said, on a counter somewhere, somebody picked up. The point is that they always try to cobble together these narratives. So there's a lie out there. Most targeted thing ever, despite Elon calling it a terror attack like an idiot. And then they go, whoa, but how come one of these targeted Hezbollah pagers was in the hands of this Iranian ambassador? Okay, well, that might seem to make sense if your assumption was that it was only in Hezbollah hands, or that it was even only given to them, and as opposed to just getting it in as many Lebanese hands as possible, or anybody for that matter, including Iranian entities. Now, look, let's be clear. Hezbollah is a political organization, and Lebanon in general has an ally of Iran. And yes, there is an overlapping relationship. You want to call it the strategic partnership, if you will. It's not the way they frame it as somehow Iran like dictating everything that happens here. So the point is, it wouldn't be surprising there would be overlapping communication. The only thing that makes this into what they want it to be is the lie that this was only given to Hezbollah. And then on top of that, knowing that they weren't even all military aspects. So I don't even know the reality of whether this in fact was what happened in this case, or they just chose to bomb this guy or attack him with something else. But nonetheless, she comes in and goes, because can we focus on the fact that the ambassador of Iran had a Hezbollah pager? This is not legit. This is not a legitimate regime. It's a terror organization. So they're just trying to scoot the narrative along. Don't look at the illusion, the lie that everyone sees the lie. Let's push it further and make it about Iran because that's what they're trying to do. And I simply said, you guys just cobble together one lie with another and act like we all can't see it. Because the truth is that if we don't know for sure this was given to only Hezbollah, and it seems to have been provably not, and it's in the hands of civilians, well, all you're doing is using the lie to make it seem as if this guy is now Hezbollah, even though all of it is rooted in a complete fabrication. Now, of course, the point is that you can see the influence of these people, right? So there's an Israeli entity. She is what is her current position now? I believe she was into the UN at first, right? What is she? A journalist, writer, advice. So she's definitely acting at behalf. Like, she's been doing interviews as an official representative of Israel. She was basically, let's be clear that this person is a representative in many cases of the Israeli agenda. So she comes out and goes, why did they have it? And so did a lot of Israeli entities. And look at randomly, the creator of Libs of TikTok, of her own accord, of course. Why did the Iranian ambassador to Lebanon have a Hezbollah pager? Of course, that's completely organic, right? She just woke up and was like, that's a good question. Or, and I'm spitballing here, somebody put it in front of her. I think we can all acknowledge that that's part of what's going on today. I just want to make sure we recognize that. And here's what we get into the idea of the eyes being hurt predominantly. So Lala Al-Arian says, oh wait, am I back one more? Hold on. Shoot. Did I just lose it now? I think it was right here is where we were. So bottom line is, she goes, this is what so many of you are giddy about. Because you're seeing this spread around and the Zionist circles are laughing. The TikToks and all these different things on their Telegram channel, they're all posting, laughing, and it's all out in the conversation. You can see it everywhere. Gloating about this because they're arguing, oh, it's all terrorists, right? But it says, as you already heard, as Abu Sita pointed out, children, women, some of the patients they had to remove both eyes. Dr. Eli Swarak points out, it kills me, he says. In the past 25 years in practice, I've never removed as many eyes as I did yesterday. And she's simply going, this is what you guys are cheering about? Guess what Emily chimed in with? You're damn right. I don't care if every single Hezbollah terrorist, and see, that's the lie, goes blind. They are terrorists all hell-bent on destroying Israel and creating war. No, that's not even remotely true. Not even remotely. Even if you think they're terrorists, that's not actually accurate in any sense. The reason all this is happening is because of the belligerents of Israel. There's no question about that. But the bottom line is that there were other people hurt, that not everybody in Hezbollah is a military entity. They don't care. These are criminal actions. These are terrorist entities parading as some kind of democracy. And the bottom line on top of that is that we can see that she is praising this, promoting this, laughing about this. And it doesn't matter that you can see doctors telling you that it was children or that it was women or that these weren't pagers given to Hezbollah. It doesn't matter because the narrative will be paraded by the libs of TikTok people and the rest that will just continue to say whatever Israel says. Now, Dan Cohen points out that even Zaka, the supposed aid or support group, the rescue organization that's all about helping people, they made a joke about it too, because everyone's doing that right now. Apparently on Twitter, it's completely okay to praise the terror, the violent actions of Israel and make fun of it and go, look at how they all got killed. Look at their eyes are out because of the pagers. But apparently in every other context, you're not allowed to praise a violent event. Isn't that like right in their terms of service, like in YouTube and Twitter? Yeah, it really is. But except not when it comes to Israel, because those things mean nothing when it's Elon or the rest of them, Twitter or Facebook. They don't care because those things only apply when they want to stop you from doing things that they don't agree with. They censor all the time. And they also allow things that violate explicitly their own rules when they want to. And it says, sorry, we haven't been here lately, ran out of batteries in our pager. But to be clear, in no way am I even suggesting they should be censored. Even the ones that you probably think should be in some cases. I am always erring on the side of absolute free speech. I'm simply pointing out that they will censor people for saying from the river to the sea and then allow people to praise and gloat about and cheer on violent acts against civilians as long as it's Israel. Now, Rami Abdul points out the legal dynamic here. And remember, he is the chairman of the Euromed Human Rights Group. No international body, and this was at least as of the 18th, has condemned Israel's use of booby traps, like pager explosives, a violation of customary international law, Rule 80, which bans traps linked to protected objects or civilians. And they violated this all explicitly. No one cares. Afshin Ratsani from the Going Underground show, under the rules-based order, you can, apparently, infiltrate supply chains and turn thousands of communication devices into weapons, detonate them all across the sovereign country, indiscriminately causing mass civilian casualties, remain silent, and have the supposed enforcers of the rules-based order not condemn, let alone act against a blatant act of state terrorism. Israel's actions in Lebanon once again exposed the rules-based order as simply rules for thee and not for me. There's no way around this. And anybody with a brain can see that just, people just don't want to acknowledge it. Now, Robert also points out, as of this was today, I believe, in regard to what happened in the Security Council, that was on this exact point. China said it was illegal because it is. Russia said it was terrorism because it is. Lebanon, of course, said it was terrorism because it obviously is. The U.S. said Iran was bad and we support Israel, which has to do with what? Well, what it is exactly what Israel wants to come from this, that Iran is why Lebanon's doing this and we're fighting Iran. Think of how abstract and ridiculous that is when you just murdered children and civilians with exploding pagers that have been there for months. And you get the U.S. to stand up, who screams about liberty and freedom and rights and law, and go, we're on, bad guy. We stand with the terrorists that just killed children. Because that's what they really are, in fact. Israel, of course, Hamas, Hezbollah, Human Shield, killing children, self-defense, exactly what you would expect. And he's not making this up, by the way. He's just summarizing for you, and he goes there, save you time. Watch it for yourself. We'll make a point at the end. It's embarrassing. Even about the West Bank settlements right now, they're having UN discussions about it because the conversation of how it pertains to Lebanon, the back and forth, but also because it's impossible to ignore. They're literally overtaking Lebanon. Everyone in the conversation knows it's illegal. They know it's illegal. And yet they're trying to argue that we somehow have a right to defend ourselves while we're pushing people back into what you already know is illegal. They're forcing them to acknowledge these things in real conversation. And so even that conversation, when you're like, is this legal? Are these West Bank settlements supposed to be there? What do? They stand up and go, you're all racist. And how dare you? The UN is Hamas. It's the same stupid things every time. But here we are. Now, Daniel McAdams points out, specifically speaking to U.S. conservatives, he says, particularly Christians, justifying Israel's act of terror as a targeted attack. He says, are you so morally degenerate that you believe turning everyday devices into literal suicide bombs that can kill at random and without warning anyone in proximity of a target is somehow just how war works, or them's just the breaks? He says, hi, Daddy, here's your pager. It's going off. Well, it's the kid's fault. These are things that you can see online right now. Driving, flying with dozens of innocent, even if the target is a Hezbollah. All these are happening. Is this okay with you, fellow Christians? Are you sick? Is it totally justified to put thousands of totally innocent people at risk, but at the same time, you are constantly bleating about Israel as the only democracy with the most moral military? I am not going to call you out by name, he says, but you bloody well know who you are. You make me sick. May God have mercy on your soul. Now, honestly, the point that sticks out to me is the idea of the terrorism aspect of this, or the suicide bomb discussion. Like, we'll play that clip again in a second. This is where this stuff comes back to. And really, even if you want to act like these are bad guys, the point is that you can't. Right now, we're talking about the idea of proximity, or the idea of what's the word I'm looking for? Not reciprocal, but symmetry, I guess, is there's another word I want to use there. But the point being, these are all about international law, right? So you're highlighting whether it's proportional. That's what I was looking for. Proportionality. All these things matter in whether or not this is a legal act in any context in war. But what we're seeing here is indiscriminate. I mean, at the very least, you can see that half the people that were hurt were not what they're claiming they are. And then people that support it just go, well, too bad. They shouldn't have been there. And then pretend that you're supporting international law when you're claiming they do it over here. It's ignorance. And I know that people out there who are on their side of this, maybe conservative or whatever we're talking about, there's liberals doing it too. I know you see it, you feel it, you know it's wrong, but in some cases you're choosing not to say anything because you don't want to challenge your party. Speak up. You're only hurting yourself, you're only hurting your party even, or even people that are in that, if you continue to pretend this is not exactly what it is. Edward Snowden. Now, he was covering this as it was happening, kind of going back and forth about whether this was implanted or whether this was some kind of reaction. That was the worry at first, that they were able to electronically cyber attack, create this explosion. That was pretty terrifying. It does seem that this has been deduced down to actual implantation. And he says what Israel has just done is, via any method, reckless. I agree. He says they blew up countless numbers of people who were driving, meaning cars out of control, shopping. Your children are in the stroller, standing behind him in the checkout line, etc. Indistinguishable from terrorism. It's amazing. People are acting like this is not what everybody thinks. Now, Kevork also points out that we need to consider this in the context of the Beirut explosion. Really do. Lebanon's 9/11 and the reality of what it actually was that everybody knew, and they just somehow buried this. Now, I'll include this discussion we had on it on August 10th. Check out Kevork's work and everybody else that covered this. Beirut blast, who benefits? You damn well know. Now, the responses. Now, actually, let me play it. Since we just came off the terrorism, I'll play this twice, in fact. I want to reiterate this point from the beginning, and I'll play it again when we get to it next. And this is the idea that this is where this stuff comes from. The bombs, the pagers, the suicide bomb conversation comes from Zionism.
The Zionists have used it and brought it, in fact, to the area. Terrorism, as we know it today, the planting of bombs in marketplaces and so on and so forth, was, in fact, introduced into the Middle East by the Zionists in the 20s. But the net result of Zionist terrorism and violence in the first third of the 20th century has brought forth, to my mind, the anomaly, the horrific and unacceptable status in the Middle East today of the State of Israel, which is in fact an armed garrison state, which now exports more arms and distributes violence all around the world, vastly disproportionate to its size. I mean, in that respect, I think it's a horrible cycle of violence. But in it all, I think the Palestinian is the victim. There's no question about that.
So here is Dave Portnoy highlighting the New York Post disgusting headline, "Beep, beep, boom. 2,800 Hezbollah terrorists hit by exploding." No, it's well more than that, about 4,000 casualties, as I understand it. In fact, that's not, I think there's even more, including the walkie-talkie part after the fact. Thousands and thousands of casualties, which include injuries. Beep, beep, boom. Right? Think about what they're doing right there. When the obvious reality is the killing of innocent people. It's disgusting. And they just go Hezbollah fighters because that's what they were told by Israel. That's journalism in this country as it pertains to the corporate and mainstream alternative media. Now, Dave says, I can't wait to watch when this becomes a spy movie. That's where we are at this point already. We're not even engaging with the fact that there are people that are right now having their eyes removed from their head because you killed them or you exploded. I mean, it's so disgusting the kind of way these responses are. Even if it was just Hezbollah members, these are still human lives. The way that these partisan people respond, it kills me. He says, the craziest counterterrorism plot I've ever seen. And Linda Yaccarino responds with an explosion emoji and gets about 1.5 thousand likes. Asaf MD responds saying, you're endorsing a terrorist attack that's been condemned by multiple nations and the international community broadly, and gets 5.2 thousand likes. Think about that. We all see it, guys. The fact that they're blindly trying to usher you into this and they're aiming at specifically whoever they can force back into the partisanship, which is the minority of this country, it needs to show you the illusion they're building. They're trying to force them one by one. They're hoping they get just enough to maintain the illusion. We see you, Linda. We know what you people are doing. The world sees you. Owen Jones, showing you that same picture of innocent people. He says, leave aside that these pagers are used by doctors and nurses. If Hezbollah blew up the phones or pagers of IDF soldiers, whether or not on duty, inevitably killing and maiming children and bystanders, which is exactly what just happened, he denounced this as an obscene terrorist attack. He's referring to a so-called journalist from the Mail, the commentator Mail on Sunday. It's UK. The point is, he goes, it's hard to think of a more sophisticated and targeted attack of terror group. He says it on the 17th. Because he was there? No. Because he knows? No. But because he was told by other interests that are coming from the Israeli agenda. There's no other way around it. This is the day. At this point, Matt Miller and the rest are going, oh, we don't know. We're waiting for information. And he stands up and goes, the most sophisticated targeted attack of all time. Because the Elon Levy morons of the world were saying that. These are the journalists we're supposed to listen to, or at least consider? Come on. That's embarrassing. And the point is that he goes, look, this same guy would be screeching about terrorism if the same thing, only targeting IDF members, actually happened. Ben Shapiro, another fake journalist, going, looks like Mossad reached out and touched someone. Oh, real funny. Real humorous. You're going to go speak to the children they killed after you make that joke? And same point, it says breaking via Reuters, hundreds of members of Hezbollah were seriously wounded. Looks like Mossad reached out and touched someone. I mean, it just has to make you sick that these people act like they're in any way have moral standing, that they're somehow fighting for good things, or that they think that they represent democracy or for, everything they pretend they're pushing out. Ben Shapiro has shown himself to be one of the most feckless. What they're doing this entire time is blindly supporting what everyone can see at the expense of even his own dwindling influence. And I don't mean that in the sense that they don't have a major platform. I mean, the fact that people would look at this person and not go, I either blindly support him because he says what I like, or that you get an objective audience that interested in your actual fact-based reporting. If you ever thought that was the case, you need to realize now that he is completely blind when it comes to this topic. And what else? That's the kind of way you should be thinking about these people. If you could pretend this is not genocide, if you could pretend that this is somehow something worthy of joking about, or that these people were the most targeted, you're not worthy to be in this field. You are lying for your agenda, or that's stupid. That's what we need to see about these people today. And I simply said, now you publicly support targeting civilians? I said, wow, Ben, tell us how you really feel. Here he is going, Israel just carried out, same thing on the 18th, mind you. Israel just carried out the most pinpoint anti-terrorism operation. You know what Levy was trying to clumsily say, not terror attack, but terrorism operation in history. I mean, think about this. This is not some Israeli politician. This is Ben Shapiro in the United States saying that what we just saw, despite the evidence, despite the children and women and everything, that this was the most pinpoint tar-up in history. Guys, these guys, he's a cartoon. That's insulting to your intelligence. And he says, and the enemies are still complaining, which suggests that their complaints have nothing to do with humanitarianism. Again, we'll get to it, that you're racist somehow if you make these cases. If you point out that it wasn't, then you're racist, because that's a really logical argument, right? I said, hey, Ben, here's the thought, just to save you some time. You can just in the future title your show exactly what Israel said, episode 200 or whatever number. Hope that helps. I genuinely mean that too. Just tell you this is what I was told to say today. Breaking news. Here he says, this person responds to him, who seems to be somebody who follows him based on their ongoing conversation. And he's like, why did you freak out at me? I was just trying to ask a question. He says, are these not war crimes? To Ben, who highlights Dr. Eli David, who knows if he's even really doctor. This guy has been one of the screaming propagandists for Zionism the moment this started. And all he says is breaking tens of Hezbollah communication devices, just selling the narrative the moment it started based on the fact, that we know that's not true. So this guy, along with a lot of the ones we've highlighted, they're given something and they report it on that moment when nobody else knows, because they are part of the operation for propaganda. This guy's one of the worst. And he's blocked me. That's why I can't see his tweet there, because I was making him look dumb with everything he said. But he goes, and he just highlights what that guy said and says, Hezbollah has been forced to rename itself Heza because they're losing all of its balls. Like, the fact that he thinks he's even funny, first of all, you're making a joke about people, innocent civilians that have got their bombs exploded around their bodies, and this is what you do? And this guy, one of his followers, says, are these not war crimes? And you can read down here. He goes, why are you so upset? I don't ask the question. The point is, he says, no. A war crime, get ready, you're going to be educated by Ben Shapiro. A war crime is when Hezbollah fires 8,000 missiles at civilians, not what happened, forcing the evacuation of northern Israel, which is illegally occupied. And amazingly, and it goes, an amazingly awesome military operation is when you pinpoint, target Hezbollah terrorists by blowing up their pagers. Okay, so let's break this down. So it's not a war crime when you target civilians because they did it first. But then you lie about it and make it about pinpoint targeting Hamas, which a child can see that that's not true. But, your journalism is so strong. The point ultimately is that if you're going to pretend that either side of what he just laid out is even remotely true, then you're blinding yourself to the narrative. But on top of that, so it's not a crime to target civilians because they targeted civilians. Some good logic there. So all you're really saying is, if they do it first, it's not a crime and we do it back. Hey, that's just simply not true. It's a crime no matter what, because it's a crime. But they want you to think like that, right? They did it first. They've been doing it forever. So when we kill children, use human shields, use chemical warfare, but use disease, it's all because they started it. Are we in kindergarten, Ben? Like, maybe you should think these things through. But at the end of the day, that's the best they've got. Same thing he's doing here. Simone says, nothing upsets racists more than Jews doing something clever. Because that's the best you can do, is boil this down to only about Jews, first of all, or that we're racist because we don't like them killing civilians. It's lazy. It's clumsy. It doesn't even add up with what's going on. But Asaf says, just so we're clear, you're cool with implanting explosives in electronic devices, then detonating them in 3,000 distinct areas in a large metropolitan city? Here's what he says. As cool as you are with October 7th. Okay, so all he just did right there was go, yes, we are breaking the law, but we think it's okay because we think you did first. That's the conversation, guys. And that's what the point is. That's not the reality. The legal standing is very clear. Not that there weren't crimes committed that day, but the bottom line is what he's highlighting is that we are doing that. We are targeting civilians, and I am okay with that because you started it. And he says, of course, handsets utilized by terrorists. You forgot that bit. You should be a doctor. No, of course, you're lying, and we all know that. And the point is that that's all you have. But just recognize that Ben Shapiro and this Zionist supporter are pretending that it's okay because you started it. We are hurting civilians, but they did it first. Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com highlights what Phil here said, and Rashid believes is disgusting, highlighting what just happened. And he says, they were all terrorists. Rashida Tlaib supports Hezbollah. So it could be that he knows that's not true and he's lying anyway, which a lot of them do anyway. He's got a huge following. Or it could be that he is stupid enough to blindly follow what Israel said out loud, knowing they've lied all the time. Or maybe a mix of both. Dave DeCamp says the 8-year-old girl was a terrorist. Obviously, these things matter. If you're objective, you can see through this. It's simple as that. Like what Dave Icke was saying in the beginning. You got to apply the skepticism equally to everybody. And if you really do, it's like watching a cartoon. It becomes very clear. Here's Nikki Haley speaking of cartoons. It says, Iran accusing Israel of a terror attack on Hezbollah is comical. Like, they just love to frame it like that. Like, there's just no point. There's no world in which this could ever be possible. So it's not possible for a state to carry out a terror attack against another state? Apparently only when Israel's involved, right? She said it's called defense. Yeah, I can't even believe they're trying to make this. So it's defense to carry out a 5-month long-term implantation terrorism or whatever. Call it what you want. How is it defense to plan out and execute a long-term plan? That's not defense. That's an attack, no matter how you spin this, no matter what happened before it. The game is they just call whatever they do defense. And they know we see through it, but it's desperation. You're lost. It's over. She says October 7th was a terrorist attack. No, it was an act of armed resistance, legally protected by international law, for Geneva Convention. And yes, crimes were committed by Hamas, but far, far more were committed by Israel. And it says the daily rockets launched by Hezbollah in northern Israel, an illegally occupied territory where illegal settlers are actively committing violence against people all the time, displacing 60,000 civilians from their homes. By the way, most of them are IDF members. Most of them have official capacity, or all of them do. So that's not even a valid point. But on top of that, it's an illegally occupied territory. So they keep pointing at that like they just don't want you to know that. They think you don't. They are bad people. They are actively facilitating the occupation of illegal territory and supporting genocide. But they want you to be the bad person. It says terrorists have been holding hostage in Gaza for a year. That's what you point at, not the genocide, though. And guess what? Those people would have been rescued on 9th and 10th of October should they have accepted either deal on the 9th or the 10th that they actually offered. Israelis are calling this out. But Nikki Haley doesn't care about Israelis. She doesn't care about Jews. She doesn't care about Christians or Americans. She cares about Israeli government Zionist agendas. She goes, let's be clear. They always love doing that. Iran wrote a textbook on terrorism and lives it every day. What does that even mean? No, they actually didn't. And you're just making that sound like they did. She's trying to say they wrote the book on terrorism. Comparatively, it's the most obvious false statement in the world. Look at what they're currently doing. Look at what the U.S. does all the time. Look at what Saudi Arabia does. And we're really going to make this sound like that makes sense? Here is what an American politician said. So here's Medea Benjamin. And just to be clear for some context, she does go, approach these people all the time and ask them questions that makes them look stupid or makes them exposes that they're criminals or that they don't care about human life. So they obviously don't like her, I think. But that's only because she's exposing that they're bad people. My point saying that is that I get that they just kind of lash out when they're trying to get a point. But listen to what she says. So with what you know, and by the way, this is on the 19th. So enough time for this to have been very clear. Civilians were hurt. It was not a discriminate attack. It was an indiscriminate attack. And she simply asks, what do you think about that? Here's how she responds.
8-year-old and 11-year-old. Huh? Say self-defense what Israel did with the pagers and how the walkie-talkie? They killed an 8-year-old and an 11-year-old. Huh?
She asked if we have our pagers on you. Why do you want them to explode? Is that what you're insinuating?
Yeah, are you threatening us?
There's really no way to misunderstand that. Well, one, she's implying that they're Hezbollah. But wait, I thought they were Iran. Oh, wait, I thought they were Hamas, right? 30 seconds ago, they were all Hamas. Oh, now they're Hezbollah. Maybe you should get your narrative straight because they're not the same thing despite the clumsy overlap. These people are ridiculous. But overall, you could even take that as a threat. But this is an American politician speaking to her own constituency and saying, do you have your pager on you? I mean, that's got to be, it needs to show you what these people really are. I mean, maybe it's just me, but even the way these people look screams there's something wrong. But that's terrifying to me. And I said, these people are absolute monsters. They truly feel that they can act with impunity. Let's prove them wrong. Two-party illusion. And the bottom line is that they continue to do this. And I mean, like since October 7th, highlight that they're no longer even bound by the illusion that they're somehow trying to win political seats, which I think speaks to the illusion that we all know exists, hopefully, around voting. But the point is that they don't care. These are the people that are supposed to vote for them. What happened to the time when politicians would tell you what they want you to hear because they want everyone's vote? Not today, probably because they only need one vote. And you know who I'm talking about. Senator John Fetterman, a good example of that, who I don't even think's posting these things, quite frankly. He says, for the second day in a row, I absolutely endorse weaponizing Hezbollah's tools of terror against themselves. Not what happened. And Hezbollah is not a terror organization, and there are innocent people even within that, and these people don't care. You can pretend that you agree with this, or you can actually agree with it, but don't pretend that these things or these people support human rights, or support international law, or support anything they pretend they do. And I simply said, thank you for admitting that you support terrorism and the killing of children. We already knew that, though. Congressman Brad Sherman, he says, let's be clear. They always think that gives them some kind of gravitas. I'm like, oh, it's ridiculous. Like the words wouldn't be clear in their own right. It is strategic. In its strategic attack. And right, this is on the 17th. A U.S. politician, when there's really no way he could possibly know what actually happened other than having people in Israel tell him what they said happened, he decides to post it, vomit it out on Twitter. In a strategic attack on Hezbollah, Israel used innovative methods to carry out precise built. Nope, he's already lying. Maximizing the elimination of terrorists. Nope. While minimizing harm to civilians. Well, at least he acknowledges harm to civilians, but that's also not true. There's no way they could have minimized anything. This was an indiscriminate attack with a 5-month gap between when it was put out and when they executed it. And he says, Iran's ambassador must explain why he had a Hezbollah filter. Oh, look at that. Don't you wonder who's seeding these thoughts into their mind? It's very clear to me. What was the other point? He's simply saying using diplomats to carry out terror. It's all assumption. Saying, given that Iran's long history of using diplomats to carry out terror. Oh, are you talking about Israel? Maybe you misspoke there. Pretty sure Israel's the one that's been caught doing that over and over and over and over and over. This includes the plot to assassinate Saudi ambassador. What about the assassinations of nuclear scientists in Iran? And I mean, like the civilian nuclear program that the IAEA and even the U.S. today have admitted are not in the, it's all the same story. The point is they lie about everything. And what you're highlighting there is pretty much, as usual, accuse them of that which you are guilty. It says, in war, it's impossible to fully prevent harm to civilians. So you end with the point of kind of like, wait, this is pinpoint targeted, but should you acknowledge or understand that they did and it wasn't true, even then it's okay too. They always do that. They give you both sides. So no matter what you understand, all of it makes sense and it's all legal and it's all okay. So shut up and go away. No, you did not minimize harm to civilians. And then you go on to say that no one can actually not harm. So yeah, you actually can, especially if what you're actually doing is going after the people you claim you are, not bombing them or 5-month gaps in the middle of civilian locations, which is what they keep doing. Oh, we bombed a market full of 400 people because we thought he might have been. Oh, it turned out he wasn't there. Funny how no one's in prison for that. Even though even Wolf Blitzer couldn't swallow that. And then it goes on to say, of course, all the same kind of narratives. Some impacted by this operation may be civilians. Why? Human shields. Do you think he knows that? Do you think he's making that up? Do you think he's just saying that because he's been paid to? You could make your own mind up, but that's not true. We can see the videos of innocent people being killed. But here's a U.S. politician blatantly making things up in the interest of defending a terror act by a foreign country. That should make you pretty uncomfortable if you're being objective about this. And then Zachary Foster highlights the reality. Even Haaretz wrote, Israeli army uses Palestinian civilians to inspect potential booby-trapped tunnels in Gaza. Or the clip I could play for the 100,000th time of every other human rights group telling you the neighbor procedure, human shields from Israel, over and over. There's been 7 times since this started on October 7th. Just this part of it where they've been caught using human shields. But Brad Sherman wants you to believe that this is pretty terrifying to see U.S. politicians blindly doing this at the expense of Americans. Here's Mr. Fine, Representative Randy Fine, who, again, make sure you understand, he's proud of it. It's pinned right to the top of his Twitter feed. Donald Trump on Truth Social said, Randy Fine is a MAGA warrior who will stand up to anybody. And he goes, I'm honored. Yeah, this is the guy that's been promoting and cheering on attacks, even the American citizen that was just killed. He said, good, kill more of them. They're all terrorists. That was an American citizen, and he didn't care. Here's this same post. Here's what you're all giddy about. Innocent children and women having their eyes taken out. And he says, yep, eyes away. I just don't understand how this can exist in a conversation where we're pretending America first is even on the table. Where are all the people that are saying that when you're looking at somebody telling you we don't care about Americans if Israel's involved? Terrifying. Bassam Youssef getting into the point of where this overlaps to the most important part of this conversation. The infiltration of tech around the world. Bassam Youssef points out, and suddenly my phone, our security system, my kids' tablets are time bombs that detonate at the whims of one country. You win, Israel. Not a single politician or late night talk show talks about this. None of that worth the news. Nothing funny that can come out of it. The whole country is truly a hostage. The whole world is. It's pretty scary. Now, what's funny is everyone's talking about World War III and all these different things, and no one in that very conversation can point at how terrifying that really was. Now, the hypotheticals are pretty scary, but they're hypotheticals. You just literally witnessed something that is truly terrifying that has implications that are far-reaching, and none of those same people are going, that's terrifying. Why? Because I think that large conversation has been completely shifted to focus away from that at all costs. Now, Daniel McAdams highlights what George Galloway says, which is, what if a Lebanese electronic device is currently above your city, right? Your window seat, on board a commercial airliner, bringing a Boeing 747 down on your family, your neighbors, on you. Would you be laughing then? He's talking about all the people out there screaming that this is something to be jeered about, laughed about, praised. There were people in different locations and cars and things that ended up hurting other people around them. What if it happens again? It happened twice. What if it isn't a plane? What if it's meant to be? Like, think about these things, and it's amazing that anybody can deny the validity of these claims. And Daniel McAdams says people don't understand the massive scale of this Israeli terrorist attack. Suddenly, nothing and no one is safe anywhere. Now, I'm not going to go as far as to try to, I can't live like that. Even if that's the reality, it's impossible to jump in every shadow like that, because you'll never, the point is you could take it to that extent. You could realize, and which is what we'll get into in the U.S. side of this, that this could possibly mean that the phone in your hand right now could be one of those things. Daniel McAdams highlighting Lord Bebo, who says, guess what? Israel produced the pagers. Now, it's important to see this. The reason I didn't bring this up in the beginning, especially when we get into the point of what Freddie Pontone adds to it. I wanted this to be an evolution of understanding, right? See, just by the way, I very well could have jumped this out right in the front, probably got a lot more attention and views for it. But see, that's not my objective here today. My objective ever is not about maximizing views, even though there is a level of reaching more people. I think we're suppressed anyway. My point is for those that actually know we're here and actually care to follow and entertain the possibilities and think about the source material, look for themselves. It's about trying to bring along the evolution of understanding. And now the point here is that we can see not only was Israel involved, not only do they put the explosives in there and have a 5-month gap, but they actually built these things. And that overlaps with Pontone's research, which, by the way, was sort of why I was jumping through that pretty quickly, because I wanted to bring this back up now in the context of what he already found out. So that was his previous research I wanted to include. Israel, this is Mail Online, Israel did not tamper with Hezbollah pagers. They built them from scratch using shell companies that had been making and shipping the devices to Lebanon for years in preparation for the attack. Think about the long-term planning of taking over shell companies or franchises, however you look at it, and then keeping this going for years in order to keep and then after this long period of time, building these from scratch and facilitating this, and then a 5-month gap, and then executing this. You know as well as I that these things are all over the world. They are praising that. They're promoting the idea of the Israeli startup, Unit 8200, Silicon Valley, everything. We'll get into how in-depth this is in the United States. He says, now it appears that the Israelis set up a front company across Europe, or companies, to manufacture the pagers themselves, embedding small amounts of this explosive inside, ready to detonate when they should want it to. That could mean there are other explosives still around. It really could. And I'm really not trying to fearmonger. I think this is a valid concern. Daniel adds that, and he highlights what he said, that could be still around. He says, I keep saying, this is a serious issue. No one knows how many killer electronic items are floating around in the global marketplace, because this has been going on for a long time. That is why it is a colossal lie to call this the most targeted op ever. It is the exact opposite. A massive crisis and a door to global terrorism. The Rubicon is crossed. I really think it's to the level of that concern that we're talking about, or at the very least, the possibility that these things could be literally everywhere. I mean, let's be clear about the reality that Israel's government has been openly stating over the years that they don't care about America and they don't care about their own people. But that they've said that they can manipulate the United States whenever they want to. They can pit the parties against themselves. Netanyahu, in multiple cases, has been caught on video saying these things. And we consider the Samson option. Very provable, a stated policy of if and when they should be under the risk of annihilation, that they would execute a nuclear attack, I guess, on the world or whoever they're fighting, any way that would hurt the world regardless. So I wouldn't put it past them from putting these things everywhere. And then having the ability to do it to anyone, anywhere, whenever they should want to. That terrifies me. And you know as well as I, that's very possible that we're looking at here. Now, we're going to overlap this with these points about the U.S. government, with the claims of the over-focus on China, because there is a reason to be worried there. But if you're so concerned about that, why would this not matter to you? Which is what we see in the largely Republican conversation. Now, Matthew Keyes adds an important part to this. He says, as we hear about the pagers in Lebanon that injured more than 2,700 people today, this on the 17th, a reminder that one of the things that came out of the Snowden leaks is that the NSA intercepts packages en route to customers to install malware and surveillance devices. All right, so that means that even if you order from somebody else, they'll intercept it on the way and do something like that. Now, we're either talking about surveillance and malware, but he goes, quote, these pagers were likely modified, he's quoting the article, in some way to cause these types of explosions. Now, this is obviously early. The point is we now know the explosive part of it. And he goes, the size and strength of the explosion indicates that it was not just the battery. He then goes, the exploding pagers attack is a turning point in electronic and psychological warfare, opening up a new and frightening front. Your governments are supporting all of this, or at the very least too scared or compromised to do anything about it. Then he says, and he's pointing back to something before, saying, in a sizzle reel showcasing its pagers and other wireless products, Gold Apollo, which is one of the overlapping parts to this, says it manufactures everything in Taiwan. After thousands of pagers exploded in Lebanon on Tuesday, a Gold Apollo executive claimed the company outsourced those pagers to a company in Europe. That's what we're getting to. And he says here, the New York Times claims the European company BAC Consulting that produced Lebanon's exploding pagers was a shell company set up by Israeli intelligence. The pagers have been manufactured and shipped for at least 2 years. This is absolutely terrifying to me. I forgot to grab this. Because of the obvious implications that everybody seems to be ignoring that doesn't want to implicate Israel in what's going on. Maybe it won't. Maybe there's no way back machine. Let's see. There we go. Or rather, archive. As that opens. There we go. It's right there. The Israeli government did not tamper with the Hezbollah phones that exploded. Defense and intelligence officials say. Wrong one. I forgot to open this earlier. The point is that you could read through this for yourself. Over the summer, shipments of large pagers to Lebanon increased, with thousands arriving in the country. Hezbollah officers' lives, intelligence. The Hezbollah, they were a defensive measure, but in Israel, intelligence officers refer to the pagers as buttons. Anyway, we're already way past our time. Shoot. I know you guys, and you have every right to make fun of me for how much I try to make them shorter and then just never seems to happen, especially when I did that the other day and went for 5 hours because I gave up on that throughout the middle. Anyway, I'll include this for you. Read through it for yourself. The bottom line is we can see clearly, oops, wrong button, that the NSA aspect of this could play a role. And I only argue that in the sense that we know that there's an overlap of the intelligence apparatus, as Whitney's covered very extensively. And so we need to wonder what role that may play coming into other countries, or specifically in the United States, and the fact that this is very clearly tied back to Israeli intelligence, which we already know. Now, Craig Murray adds this point, and this is where it gets worrisome for me in a U.S. perspective, because I've seen this as well. And this is what you've seen me point this out the entire time, whether it's the reactive propaganda or the fact that the Israeli Zionist element will scream the quiet part out loud because they want to show you how powerful they are, or it's pettiness, it's hubris, it's small. In this case, exposing the larger reality because they want to gloat about how much power they have. It says, extraordinary, the number of Zionist shills who have gloatingly tweeted to him, Craig Murray, about how much Israeli tech is in Western consumer devices. He says they're too stupid to grasp that industry buyers are urgently researching alternative suppliers this very moment. Now, I would argue the larger worry is like that this agenda the trap has already been set. So whether or not they get new buyers, the point is too late. It's already seeded throughout your electronics. And they're gloating about it. Now, it could just be that they want to scare you, but that's terrifying to me. And it says, plus, even the European Commission are now on to it as a danger to the EU and consumer security. Now, here's Brian Mast. You know, Mr. Zionist Brian Mast, who served in the IDF but somehow pretends he's an American politician. He says, this is warfare in the 21st century. He goes, this is why we need to stop relying on China for our tech. Make things in America. He's literally highlighting the point. This is what China would do. Really? So you're not worried about the Israeli infiltration, which is wildly infiltrated throughout our entire country? There are Israeli startups using, this is the next point we're going to get into, everywhere. 911 call centers, all sorts of overlapping tech points in this country. And the only thing I can point out is worry about China when you can see the problem right in front of you. You know why? Because this guy is not in the interest of Americans. And APAC Tracker goes, is this you? Cracking a joke about it. He goes, this is what I call sending a message. Those are civilians being killed, Brian. He doesn't care, guys, because it's Israel's enemies, so it's in his enemy too. And including if that's you, mind you, whether you're American or not. Did you see him scream about the American they killed in Israel? Did you see him condemn the violence? No. Bottom line, these people are actively pointing at the problem, but only when it pertains to China. I think that's pretty terrifying from American politicians. He also points this out. Leaked blueprint of the next Hezbollah communications device. They're making jokes about this, really trying to downplay the concern as it pertains to you, I think. Now let's get into the main point here. Great article from Whitney. This is an original article for the Last American Vagabond from May 12th, 2023. The Prince and the Spy. As it says, a TLAV investigation has found that Eric Prince, the man behind the Blackwater mercenary group, now called Academy, recently teamed up, this is in 2023, with an Israeli spy, creating a front company with her to help Israeli defense technology providers exploit loopholes and sell their products to the American military. That's how crazy this gets. Now, you've already seen this. I've talked about it in the past, or I have more than once. If you haven't seen this, this is probably going to blow your mind. So her name is Lital Lesham. Now, she was the operations officer in the IDF of the besieged Gaza Strip, and later becoming a major as a position that she continues to hold to this date, at least at the time of this article. According to her LinkedIn, she served in the Israeli military intelligence from 2005 to 2011, and more specifically, served in its signals intelligence unit, Unit 8200. That's important. She later attended IDC Herzliya, an Israeli university deeply tied to its military and intelligence apparatus. There, she met Amir Elshai, and the two would co-create the company. At the time was called Reporty, later called Carbine 911. Today, it's known simply as Carbine. This is one example of something that is proliferated throughout this country and the world, quite frankly, in alarming ways. Carbine was originally founded as reported in 2014 by Leshem, Elichai, and Alex Dezengoff. Leshem and Elichai are Unit 8200 veterans. And again, this is, think of it like the NSA, right? This is an intelligence apparatus that is used by the Israeli government, and they are outspoken, which we'll get into in a second, about whether they're current or not, sort of like the CIA, that they're acting in the interest of Israel's interest wherever they are in the world. They've said this publicly in just about every interview, but if you say it, you're somehow racist. Now it's saying, while Dezengoff previously worked for the Israeli Prime Minister's office, so all coming from Israel intelligence and government, before it was revealed that Jeffrey Epstein had poured at least $1 million into the company at the behest of his close associate Ehud Barak, Carbine's board of directors, which Barak chaired, included the former commander of the Unit 8200, Pinchas Boutros, as well as Epstein associate turned venture capitalist Nicole Junkerman. You realize that that company still is existing today and still does this, despite Epstein, despite Israeli government overlap, despite intelligence, despite this very story. In the wake of the Epstein scandal, of course, Boutros, Barak, and Junkerman, among others, were removed from the board because there was an interest in hiding the real point, I think, and were largely replaced with veterans and former heads of American intelligence and law enforcement agencies. Leshem had left the company in 2017, but has continued to own shares in the company. Now, despite that shift, there's still obvious connection overlap with Unit 8200 members and Israel itself. Now, she says Carbine is a next generation 911 platform, or an NG 911. And the explicit goal of NG 911 is for a 911 systems nationwide, all of them nationwide, all the 911 call centers to become interconnected. It is currently active throughout the United States. Its main target market being the United States, guys. Its software has been criticized due to, quote, security privacy concerns about the amount of information it harvests from smartphones that call a 911 call center running Carbine software. For instance, Carbine's smartphone app extracts the following information from the phones on which it's installed. Quote, device location, video live stream from the smartphone to the call center, call message, text messages, in two-way chat windows, any data from a user's phone if they have a Carbine app and ISONET, and any information that comes over the data link which Carbine opens in case the caller's voice link drops out. That's, think of it like the authentics aspect of Twitter. Like, there's so many aspects of Israeli intelligence scooping up American information, and your government doesn't care. Neither does Elon. Neither does Blackwater and Eric Prince. Now, it says, in addition, Carbine stores all data on past calls and events in order to, quote, enable decision makers and accurately analyze the past and present behavior of their callers. Does that seem like that makes sense for their objective? React accordingly, and in time, predict future patterns. That's why. That's the pre-crime aspect that Bill Barr and Trump's administration were the ones spearheading. And now that we're seeing all these supposed assassination attempts, let's ask where that's really going. I'm willing to bet it leads to some justification for more gun control and more pre-crime, which will be cheered on by the very people who are fighting it right now. Prediction, but we'll see what happens. Now it says, as a result, Carbine, along with other Israeli intelligence-connected companies seeking to dominate the American public safety market, which is a stated objective, has the potential to facilitate controversial predictive policing, i.e. pre-crime policies. In addition to Carbine, Leshem also works for Black Cube. Black Cube, if you remember, was the group that was hired by Weinstein to literally harass and surveil his victims. It's populated with all supposed former Mossad members, in big quotes. Black Cube was specifically outed as an Israeli intelligence front organization in a 2019 article published by Calcalus Tech. That same article, which I showed you earlier, I'll show you next, contains the stunning revelation that many Israeli companies, including Black Cube, have been founded as fronts for Israeli intelligence operations all the way since 2012. It states that since 2012, cyber-related and intelligence projects that were previously carried out in-house in the Israeli military and Israel's main intelligence arms are transferred to companies that in some cases were built for the exact purpose that they're using. So like Carbine 911, for example. The article also adds, in some cases, managers of development projects in the Israeli military and intelligence arms were encouraged to form their own companies, which then took over the military and or intelligence project. This is the point. I mean, it's so obvious that we need to recognize this problem. Here's the article, the one I was showing you. Feel free to read through this. It's exactly what, Unit 8200, Israeli intelligence. Israeli is siphoning cyber-related activities from its national defense apparatus to privately held companies. It's as clear as day. Since 2012, cyber-related and intelligence projects that were previously carried out in-house in the Israeli military and their main intelligence arms are now transferred to companies that in some cases were built for that exact purpose. It says Leshem, again, one of the founders and now stockholders of Carbine, has also worked for another company tied to Ehud Barak, former prime minister of Israel, that has been described as worse than the NSO group that we've talked about in the past, which produced the notorious Pegasus software. The company she's involved with, called Toka, its top executives, like Carbine, by the way, are largely veterans of Israeli Unit 8200. It's all of these, and that's the stated purpose of it. Where Leshem also served are former commanders of their military cyber operations. The company is directly partnered with Israeli Ministry of Defense and other Israeli intelligence and security agencies since its founding. And the company only sells its products to countries that are considered allies of Israel. And they realize we can see what they're doing to the United States. We can see what they're doing to so-called allies all around the world. It says it purports to be able to hack not just smartphones, but any device with internet connectivity, such as doorbell cameras, other, quote, smart devices. So what they're literally telling you is that the company that they have founded, that is overlapped with Carbine because of the background, because of the people that founded it, because of the Unit 8200 connection, are openly telling you that this company is able to hack anything. Now, of course, they could be lying, but why in the world do we want that in any connection to something that is tied to you? Your government, I don't think, cares or is not even capable of defending you from this anymore. And it says, as will be noted later in this article, Leshem herself has noted that Toka has an open relationship with the CIA. Let's not forget, CIA, Mossad, that's JFK assassination. After being involved with a series of Israeli intelligence fronts and her enduring ties to Israeli military intelligence, through her, quote, reserve duty activities, Leshem was courted by a surprising figure, Eric Prince, war profiteer and founder of the controversial mercenary outfit Blackwater Now Academy, and seemingly about to become parts of Trump's administration. They're talking about privatizing the Defense Department, horrifying things in this context. Now, there's ways you could think. What they're trying to do in general is take the ideas from a libertarian perspective that might actually have some kind of positive outcome and pretend that's what they're doing, when all they're really doing is more authoritarian control, more fascist public-private partnership concepts. They're driving you into the same structure under the guise of what you're asking for. It is Prospera, Honduras, Peter Thiel's company. It's everywhere in the world. We will be doing more on that. We'll talk about it with our Power Stream conversation tomorrow. Now, it finishes by a couple more points saying, according to Leshem's website, a year and a half after she started working for Eric Prince, she and Prince, quote, joined forces to found a company called Comframe, a company that takes the best of Israeli defense technology and the providers therein and helps them penetrate, their word, the American market by bridging prevalent gaps. Now, of course, everyone wants to pretend the best ally, strategic partnership, most moral, all these lies. You go, there's no problem there because we're allies. But how many examples do you truly need of Israel stealing American nuclear technology and potentially overlapping that with secret sales and offers to China, or the idea of the infiltration in a countless ways, or the bombing of the U.S. Liberty, or the spy devices on the White House during Trump's administration, or the obvious influence and occupation of our ongoing political structure? That has nothing to do with race or religion. It's about politics, despite how these terms can be used in other conversations from racist people. People that want to misrepresent that as about racist or Jews or Israelis, it's not. It's about an organization, whether Zionist or otherwise, or a political entity like Israel's government, influencing policy The fact that we can even debate about that right now blows my mind. They're telling you what they're doing. Lesham also says Comframe was assisted by her, quote, premier integrator and business development platform for deploying advanced military special operations, public safety, and HLS solutions specifically in the United States, and a wide network of partnerships, both government and civilian. This really does blow my mind. Like, this is right. This is from 2023. Now, think of this in the context of what we just saw. Now, the article that referenced above notes that Comframe, quote, is focused on recognizing needs in the U.S. defense industry and matching them to possible solutions from Israeli companies. Now, this is a funneling process. It says, however, the article notes, quote, to meet the demands of American security needs, one must have an American entity. Lesham, of course, is then quoted as saying, Zachary of Tomcar had been living in Phoenix for 15 years. But he can't do that, sell to American military because he's not a citizen, but we can. So what they're saying, well, she says it right here. In other words, per Lesham, Comframe utilizes Eric Prince and presumably Burgess, who's referenced above, to sell Israeli defense technology and products directly to the American military. That in any other context would otherwise not happen because of the obvious national security concerns around buying foreign-made products for sensitive defense and military operations. But simply because Eric Prince is part of the company, well, nobody bats an eye. Can you think about how terrifying that can be with what we just saw happen and the possible implications of where these devices may be? We have literal Israeli startup intelligence companies populated throughout this country, producing all sorts of other things other than cell phones, controlling our 911 call centers, and possibly having access to your phone in that way. These things should be concerning. It says Comframe is specifically targeting special operations. She also suggests that aside from the U.S. military, another intended market for the company is NATO. She told Jerusalem Post that the U.S., quote, controls 70% of the NATO's defense industry. So by default, through the U.S. control, they're controlling 70% of the NATO aspects and what they're using and their technology. Guys, this is a terrifying view if you realize what this could mean about the influence, about the control, the infiltration of just electronics or even just in defense technology or intelligence throughout the world. How far has this actually gone? How long has this been happening? Now, actually finishing, it says, Comframe is a very suspect company. It is highly, highly secretive, targets sensitive American military agencies with foreign technology. That's its stated purpose. And its known employees are apparent spooks and intelligence-linked mercenaries. Not only that, but the history of Israeli espionage in the United States, which is long, from Jonathan Pollard to Promise, the software, to Converse and beyond. So Converse we're discussing, shows a concerted effort to target the American military and security agencies with bugged or, quote, backdoor technology. So as always, Russiagate was actually Israelgate. The China hacking phone conversation was, even if real, was probably just to hide the bigger problem of what this really highlights. Maybe there was an overlapping interest when Israel started saying, whoa, you got to stop China because we're doing that. I mean, who knows? You can think about it all you want, but let's stick to the facts when you actually break things down. Hypothesizing an important part of this. But what we know for sure is the very government that just executed a massive attack using infiltrated devices clearly has the ability to do that everywhere throughout this country. What happens if tomorrow the U.S. government goes afoul of Israel? What happens then? Certainly possible, isn't it? In addition to the above, Prince has also recently engaged in efforts to market a very suspect smartphone to MAGA Republicans as being unhackable and unsurveillable. The reality is, like, everybody that's written up on it is like, that's not even remotely true. It might as well be an iPhone with different small differences. The point is, it's not even remotely unhackable or unsurveillable. If you actually want something like that, since we're bringing it up, let's see if I can get it pop up real quick here. Well, there's the actual link to that, but I wrote about this, or we did a show about this. Dang it, it's not coming up. I'll try to include it afterward. But here's the actual link to the above phone in general. If you want to, in the show notes of the show, there's a link if you want to grab one and you get a discount and so on. I really believe in this company. It's a freedom phone that is literally de-Googled, that is absolutely disconnected from all the things that his pretend smartphone or secret phone or whatever it is, privacy phone, all the things that his still has. The point is this is actually disconnected from all these things. But the point here is that he's selling this specifically to MAGA Republicans. Why is that? He says that phone was, quote, designed in Israel, which is true, and the company that produces it is called Unplugged. According to the reports, Unplugged's day-to-day technology operations are run by Aaron Karpin, a former employee of Communitake, the Israeli startup that gave rise to now infamous hacker for hire firm NSO Group. Karpin, like Leshem, is also a veteran of Unit 8200. So now you've got a Unit 8200 intelligence entity that is building a phone that's aimed at MAGA Republicans. Maybe you should think twice about that when you're watching them explode phones in Lebanon. Just a thought. Prince debuted Unplugged's phone on Steve Bannon's War Room, because of course he did. But both Prince and Bannon have controversial relationships with exiled Chinese billionaire Guai Wengu, and known as Miles Go, we've talked about in the past. I think Matt Ayers wrote a couple articles about that for TLAV that you can check out. That Prince would help market this phone specifically aimed at MAGA Republicans is disturbing, given that his associate Leshem and other Unit 8200 Israeli intelligence veterans and operatives have played a major role in developing that infrastructure for the U.S. war on domestic terror, which is mainly targeted at the political right and has already utilized mass surveillance through smartphones and other technologies to justify arrests, including pre-crime arrests. What do you think they used to track down people from January 6th? The point is, guys, this is an overlap that you need to highlight. And if you're too afraid to point this out because of the team sport politics, then you're in a bad position. Recognize that that's not healthy for you and stand up and act with principle. Call out people that you know to be lying and call out people that you know to be ignoring very obvious threats to your safety. Now, this is the article it came from. I'll include that as well, so you can read that, or what the point she made about what they're stating this. And it's a very public conversation about Israel praising the fact that they're using these startups to change the tech industry, and all of them are directly tied back to intelligence, and all of them at many different points have stated that what they do is in the interest of Israel. Now here's Freddie Pontone, and this is the evolution of his research up to today, saying the CEO of the shell company. And this is the shell company that we talked, the globe, I'm blanking on the term now. It's a gold, or the one that was saying, no, it was outsourced. It wasn't us. So this turns out to be the shell company called Norta Global in Bulgaria. It says in Bulgaria, Rinson Jose was a member, there's supposed to be a period there. Rinson Jose was a member of Founders Nation, a platform to help entrepreneurs find or become a startup co-founder in Israel. So you know what that sounds like to me? That sounds like a way of trying to hide even the fact that you're a startup unit. Why? Because other countries are catching on. So now you need to find somebody else to be the front man for your Unit 8200 startup company for Israel. But now we know this is what this is. Israel and CEO of Fastlane Israel was a member of the Founders Nation. It says Mamram Alumni Association is a state-created defense entity and was created to satisfy perceived needs within the IDF, including support for cyber intelligence operations. The Founders Nation website is down, but we can still see the link where the association is listed. Why is it down? Because they're being exposed right now. That's my opinion. Same goes for the Norwegian entrepreneur, Rinson Jose, all of which are involved with this Founders Nation conversation, and the company, which is shell, that is a shell of the larger company that's being used to hide the fact that Israel is producing these. And lastly says the Israeli Defense Corps Center of Computing and Information Systems, known by its Hebrew acronym, and that's the point he's making, MAMRAM, is part of IDF C4I and Cyber Directory. Is that one or an I? It looks like an I maybe. C4I? Yeah, C4I. MAMRAM is responsible for the full world of IDF computing, software, algorithms, and cyber defense, and is based on advanced computing abilities. The fruit of its products can be felt by the military's edge users on land and sea and air. That's what they're saying. The point is, this company This is explicitly intelligence from Israel. This is the company that built these things, that put them out there. These are the same overlapping companies that are in the United States doing the same things, but from a different guise. That should be scary for people. He says, this is a quote from let's keep doing that. From a colonel in the IDF saying, in the past 2 decades, as cyber arena became a new combat arena, and this was, hold on, grab it in a second. Its role grew even more central since every part of the IDF has an electronic component. Now remember the time we're talking about here. So this, I thought it had it in there. Maybe I'm remembering wrong. I thought there was a date included with the quote, but the point was that ultimately we know it says that the past 2 decades, but I thought it said 2012. The point was that 2012 was when this whole kind of push is arguably really kicking off. But either way, we're talking 2 decades, so it's pretty much right there. The point is that this is when this began. So you could pretend they're 2 separate things. You could pretend that the startup idea and the new tech world is all about helping the planet, despite the fact that at the exact same moment, they're saying that same cyber arena is a new combat arena, and we need that because the IDF is technical. Okay. If you think for 1 second they did not build out their technological influence, which we're already proving today, for the very purpose of their military influence around the world, or rather intelligence at the expense of everybody they pretend they're allies with or enemies, you just don't want to see it. Because my point is not just that looks that way, but they have said this. If you listen to their interviews, specifically in Israeli media, because as always, I keep pointing out, they love to praise how they're using other countries. They do. Netanyahu's been caught countless times making fun of how easy it is to manipulate the U.S. government. Now he adds as well just her LinkedIn page you can read for yourself, and it's saying it's the first technological unit of the IDF. Now Eric Prince is on a video here. This is on the 19th. Simply adding another dynamic to this, saying Venezuelans and lovers of freedom worldwide have come together and already donated $1 million to the Ya Casi Venezuela movement. What's interesting, let's not forget the point from Venezuela, which is that one of the members of the government that the U.S. wanted in place had written a letter to Netanyahu in 2018 asking him to facilitate regime change in Israel, or in Venezuela. Very public. Now we see this has been going on for a long time. They were the ones the U.S. pretended won. Everybody else seems we're acknowledging that this was not only a legitimate election, but there was like over 800 international observers, countries that the U.S. are allies with. Some of the people that were in the opposition said that this was completely up and up. But of course, just like Bolivia and everywhere else in Syria, they just lie because they want control. Like we're seeing everywhere you look. Let's not pretend that we're going to think that they wouldn't lie about this election, but at the same time would support a genocide, right? They're lying to you about what just happened in Lebanon. They're lying about the starvation of children, lying about the bombing of innocent people. But yeah, I'm sure they're being honest about the Venezuelan election, right? Despite lying about everyone before that. Like the only people that I think go along with these, like the Musk crowd Pied Piper nonsense, is because they're either blinded by the following or they don't care. The point is, here he is trying to act like we're going to save Venezuela. This is a building problem, and these people I'm seeing the outlines of what this is about to become with Trump's administration. He says, now it's time for the business community to step up and contribute to this critical cause, right? Give money to this mercenary to help overthrow Venezuela. Your support will help bring freedom and hope back to Venezuela and bring the Maduro cartel to justice. These people pretending like they're fighting for freedom, these fake libertarians and freedom fighters are using your wanting of freedom and good things to help and to blind you to the reality that they're literally overthrowing people that are in some ways actually helping their people. But as long as they do not help the U.S. agenda, it doesn't matter what they are. They'll support genocide as long as they go along with what the U.S. wants in some cases, or arguably more compromised in that way. But let's say any other government. Groups, Saudi Arabia. As long as you get something, we don't care that you're a terrorist. As long as you work with us, hey, Sudan, you want to partner with Israel? We'll overlook everything. These people are the bad people of the world, and we need to be honest about that. Now, here's Israel, or Whitney's article about Israel in the same context from 2019 from Unlimited Hangout. How the CIA, Mossad, and the Epstein network are exploiting mass shootings to create an Orwellian nightmare. Here's one from 2020 from Unlimited Hangout. Meet the IDF-linked cybersecurity group, quote, protecting U.S. hospitals, pro bono. You see how this keeps happening? This was COVID. Before it was cyber school shooting. Every time they use these events to further infiltrate everything, specifically the tech industry, or in this case, our health industry. Here from 2023, CIA and Mossad-linked surveillance systems quietly being installed throughout the United States. Now, when you piece all this together, you tell me that's not alarming. To realize that this entity that's committing genocide, that doesn't care about the government, doesn't care about you, doesn't even care about its own people, that just literally carried out the most obvious terror attack in Lebanon, killing innocent civilians, and yet you can see that they're controlling 911 call centers, our medical system, their surveillance apparatus throughout the United States. These things are not made up. You can look these things up directly from Israeli discussions, and we're not supposed to be worried about that? Or, coming up on the election, the very open conversation that even The Guardian broke down of what I called the Israeli election interference and psychological operation industrial complex. This guy was exposed by Mike Mondawar. I'm forgetting the other articles. There are a bunch of big mainstream platforms from multiple countries jointly investigated this. This guy is an Israeli asset. He works for the Israeli government. Now it's been exposed. And what he was doing was being paid to manipulate elections and hack and use bots to manipulate online. All of this is really happening. And this guy gloated about influencing 27 out of 29 presidential elections he was involved with. And he mentions the United States, mind you. This is the real picture of what's going on. And all the partisanship, including the left, by the way, are ignoring it. Even the ones that point out the genocide don't want to admit that our elections are not what they appear to be. Not in the context with Israel, anyway. Richard Medhurst points out something bigger in the context of how long this has been happening. He says the deadliest terrorist attack in history against British subjects was carried out by Zionists. Never forget that fact, right? Menachem, Begin? Now I forget how to say his name all of a sudden. One of the previous prime minister, or the original, one of the first prime ministers of Israel, Begin. What is it? It's Behin? I don't know why I'm forgetting that right now. But anyway, responsible for the King David Hotel bombing, even became the Israeli prime minister because Israeli society rewards violence. I think that's by design. I think it's been, same way the U.S. government conditions Americans just to reward war, right? But he says in 2006, the Israelis unveiled a plaque at the site of the King David Hotel to commemorate that very attack. A bit like if Al-Qaeda would unveil a commemorative plaque at the site of the Twin Towers. It's exactly what we're talking about. Netanyahu attended the celebration of terrorism. The plaque even blamed the victims for not evacuating fast enough. The same way Israelis think you deserve to die for leaving quickly enough on the roof after a roof attack. It was so offensive, the British government officially protested, and the Israelis changed the text, but only in English, not in Hebrew. That's my point from before. It's in your face. They want that to be the case because it's important for the people that they support or that support them to see we have that control over these people. Israel, Europe, and the United States, they're all powerful. Look, we control them. We can influence them. That's not my opinion. They praise that all the time. That's why Netanyahu's been caught on video more than once making that statement. We just pretend it's not there. Then he finishes by saying, and then we give these people weapons and intelligence. How humiliating. And then there's this clip again. The point is, this is where it started.
The Zionists have used it and brought it, in fact, to the area. Terrorism, as we know it today, the planting of bombs in marketplaces and so on and so forth, was, in fact, introduced into the Middle East by the Zionists in the 1920s. But the net result of Zionist terrorism and violence in the first third of the 20th century has brought forth, to my mind, the anomaly, the horrific and unacceptable status in the Middle East today of the State of Israel, which is in fact an armed garrison state, which now exports more arms and distributes violence all around the world, vastly disproportionate to its size. I mean, in that respect, I think it's a horrible cycle of violence. But in it all, I think the Palestinian is the victim. There's no question about that.
So basically, I'm going to skip some of this at the end, which whether it's tomorrow or the day after that, I will be getting into. But ultimately, to finish, I want to include a few points about the other aspects of this. And then I was going to go into a larger point about, what Israel's doing still, the showing you what they really are in the context of the moment-to-moment actions of the last few days, like I usually try to do. But also in the context of what we just discussed. The infiltration of Israeli in the tech or intelligence in many different forms. It also applies to other countries too. This is very interesting to me. This is posted on September 11th, mind you, 2024. Israeli pleads guilty to shipping U.S.-made avionics to Russia, which, by the way, was violating sanctions. How ridiculous is that? It says the U.S. Justice Department says this person sent aircraft tech, some of it while with missile applications worth $2 million to Russian customers. You know, this is exactly what happens everywhere. Same with China, I mentioned. That's happened where James Corbett's covered this, just Israel just kind of facilitating that process to China, or the idea of using this in any other context. Stealing nuclear technology. These people abuse that relationship at every turn, and your compromised politicians either don't know or don't care, or aren't able to do something about it. The reality, though, is that if the Israelis in this context are using this pipeline, how do we know what else is influenced? Right? They're using, how if the NSA overlap, how do we know they're not simply part of that same point? How do we know we're not going to see Russian planes start falling out of the sky? We need to worry about these kind of things because it's happened before. Or this is something that Casey Wright pointed out, which is pretty crazy to me. I guess his name now is back to Bread and Circus. So Lord Bevo points this out, and this does appear to be a real story. At the very least, that this guy is claiming this from Russia. And I guess this guy's like the leader of the Chechen Republic in Russia. Here's an image of him on a cyber truck with a gun. Apparently, Elon Musk has remotely disabled his truck. Obviously, you know why this connects. So he writes, how many accounts who retweeted this or liked it have fear-mongered about Joe Biden doing the exact same thing? Right? I mean, we know this from the leaks from WikiLeaks, the conversation of, what's his name? I'm blanking. Michael, dang it. For some reason, I just can't draw these things today. Usually I'm good about bringing them up. What's his name? Give me the name in the chat. The example of somebody who clearly, arguably, I think the evidence suggests, was killed using the hijacking of remote vehicles. Right? This is what WikiLeaks exposed. There is this element, as well as the fact that the whole Vault 7 conversation, it showed that the U.S. government, and I guarantee is real, has the ability to hack or do these kind of things and leave the fingerprints of somebody else, specifically Iran. But so the idea, though, is that should be terrifying, because and this is not just the Cybertruck, mind you, but at the very least realize that if Elon Musk is willing to cross that line publicly, Hastings, thank you, Michael Hastings. I mean, that has to show you where this is going, guys. Why? Because, and that's Michael Wright's point here, or Casey Wright's point here. Why would you praise it here but be scared of it over there? Because partisan politics. Oh, it's the good AI. Oh, it's the good technocracy, right? It's blinding people that don't care because partisan teams for politics. The problem here is that this is where we're going. That you can just be like, I disagree with your opinion, even if it is something that everyone might, terrorist, whatever you want to claim. Well, at what point does it become, oh, you're anti-Semite. Oh, you said the wrong thing about Israel. Oh, whatever it is. Now you're censored. Now you're shut down. Now your car doesn't work. Now you can't access the internet. That's where this is going. And his point is that everyone's basically cheering this on. Oh, yeah, bad guy. Get him. It should be scary to you to see where this is going. And the very people that should be the most resistant to this and were during the COVID-19 discussion, when all these same things were coming up in different contexts, are being the most pacified because of the power structure that I see developing. It's the same thing I think happened during COVID-19. They're being pacified by the element of Trump, in this case now, Musk and Thiel and Vance and everything else is building. I hope I'm wrong. Now, to finish in general, I just want to highlight, and I will go through this more because I'm sure this will continue into the next couple of days, sadly enough, which is that ultimately Israel has just continued to bombard civilian areas in Lebanon. Now, this is being reported broadly, by the way, bombing the capital, Beirut, which is very densely populated civilians, or this one says killing a commander, but I think it's this one actually. Yeah, IDF confirms airstrikes on southern Beirut suburb. And there's videos. I mean, it's a suburb full of civilians. They're openly attacking civilian locations. And my point is they're just going, that's because they started it. They bombed us first, but they didn't, though. They didn't start it. You're bombing they're bombing illegal occupied areas and military targets, best as I can tell. And here you are praising the bombing of civilians. And they go, well, we killed a commander. And it's the same game we're seeing. Didn't you already hear what they said? Oh, it's because they're using human shields. They are setting this narrative up. That's what they're doing right here. Herzog. I repeat again and again, we did not want this war, but we are entitled to the most basic rights of nations. Their self-defense, they're saying. Security, tranquility. and that's why you carried out a terrorist attack and killed civilians? Like, I don't think people are going to feel that makes sense. Bring our hostages back. Well, you're the one not doing that, and your own people keep saying that. So this is aimed at the Western audiences because they're desperate. It says, last night we saw the precise, impressive actions of it. That's all they're trying to do, make it seem like we did a good thing. And all they ultimately argue is they're using human shields. That's what it says right here. The hostages back to their families, displaced. Oh, wait, is that the right? Hold on. I'm trying to just rush through this. There was a, yeah, that's right here. IDF says the IDF is currently striking Hezbollah targets in Lebanon to degrade Hezbollah's terrorist capabilities. Right. So that, which means, by the way, inherently people that aren't in the military wing, just Hezbollah is a broad term, right? That's like saying, I mean, in this case, we can prove that there are elements of this that are not there, as they said, doctors, nurses, aid workers. But it says 4 decades, and here begins the new phase of the war. Just like we saw in Gaza, they're just going to lazily move it over to Lebanon. 4 decades, Hezbollah has weaponized civilian homes, dug tunnels beneath them, and used civilian shields. Well, there you go. It's worked for a year, right? So now you can bomb anywhere in Lebanon because you said there's tunnels and stuff. Who cares about proving anything? All you got to do is make some video highlighting an old tunnel that you showed 30 days ago and make it look like Lebanon. Everyone's going to pretend it makes sense. Having turned them into a war zone, or human shields for that matter. You mean despite what Owen Jones showed you, and we've all seen that even Haaretz has pointed out that you keep using human shields? So does that mean they can bomb anywhere in Tel Aviv? By that logic, that would make sense, right? But no, that's not how that works. And it seems like only one entity is doing that. The IDF is operating to bring security to northern Israel. You mean the illegally occupied territory? Like, guys, they have lost the plot. Anybody that has any understanding of anything regarding the international law or this situation should be laughing at how dumb this is, but no one seems to want to stop them. This point was them bringing, this was simply saying, the point is that this is from BBC. Over 83 of all the attacks conducted between Israel and Lebanon since October 7th have been made by Israel. That's from July, but it's true then. It was true now. That's from, not that I'm BBC verified. It's about the facts that are there. For whatever reason, they're highlighting that fact. And it is the case. They're just making it out to be that they're under attack all the time when Israel's the one that is going after Lebanon. Roberts made this clear. And you get these other propagandists for Israel coming out and going, how quickly we forget about the 12 Druze, not Israeli, they're Syrian Druze population. They were explicit about that. They drove Netanyahu out. They said, you're not part of this. It's an illegally occupied territory that Trump gave Israel when he doesn't have that right. Now, this case, you remember, because Robert covered it, and the video undeniably shows the reality that what they did was launch a rocket from the Iron Dome. Now, whether it was an accident or it was deliberate, that rocket, which went in the sky and then fell back down, which we've shown many times. And this one's actually from a previous example, but it's happened. And the one we showed you was that as well, where it flies up and falls back down, and all of the evidence, I mean, across the board, I think this is the one. In any case, that's the one they rush him out. The evidence is undeniable. They bombed, either by accident or by design, a bunch of children playing soccer and then just blamed it on Lebanon. And the reason they rushed away from it so fast is because it was obvious, sort of like the flower massacre that they just ran from. And that's the same reason. Oh, how fast we forgot. Well, because you stopped talking about it, because the evidence showed you murdered those children and just thought you could use it, and it didn't work. Same thing. The Persian Jews. These 12 Druze Israeli children, they're not Israeli. The only people anywhere in the world saying that is the Netanyahu government. But that's all they have. They're failing. They're losing. Now, lastly, I was going to go through these just rapidly. I'll play this later. It's a great clip from Ben Swan. It says an Israeli Hebrew language newspaper is highlighting that the IDF general has openly argued that turning Gaza into a place where no human being can exist is necessary. That's new. But let's keep pretending it's all about Hamas, okay? Because if you are, you're a bad person, and you know that, and you're lying to yourself because you don't care about human life, or at the very least, you think those people there aren't worthy of it. If you went to one funeral for a day, if you went to one funeral a day for the children killed in Palestine, it would take 27 years to attend all the funerals. Here is why we can tell you that. This has been released by the Ministry of Health from Gaza. Now, despite all the stupid claims from Israeli propagandists, both the military and the intelligence aspect of the Israeli government have openly said that the Gaza ministry is both accurate and reliable. That's not my claims. That's directly from the Israeli government. I'll just grab one of them since I brought it up. And the point here is just are accurate. That's from the Israeli intelligence apparatus. The reason I'm saying that is because this is from the Israeli health ministry that the Israeli government told you is accurate. And they are saying, here are 649 pages with the ID, the gender, the age, the name of every Palestinian killed. So let's pretend that they can prove they're all Hamas members. At some point, very rapidly now, this is going to be fleshed out. But the point is they won't care because they're already hiding every lie. They're already hiding every genocidal act, and your governments don't care. But the facts are there. And the reality is the first 14 pages of this document are 1-year-old children. Really let that sink in for a second. 14 pages of 1-year-old children, but we're going to pretend this is all pinpoint targeting. Tell us again, Ben Shapiro, about how they pinpoint target everybody. Makes me sick. And then another a visual representation of the 355 bullets, which has been proven both by human rights groups on the ground, by the UN investigation, the fact that the Israeli occupation army fired 355 bullets at that little girl by herself in a car. Hindry job. Here's a clip, by the way, that Marshall shared with me as well. Here's Owen Jones sharing the same, of the Israeli military throwing off a dying Palestinian man off the roof. Didn't we hear that somewhere before? Isn't that what they keep screaming about Iran and about everybody else? They throw them off the roofs. Well, here you go. Every accusation is an admission. This is real, guys. This is, as Owen Jones says, ISIS throwing people from the roofs was long regarded as the trademark of why they're depraved. Well, here you go. Throwing a blindfolded Palestinian from a roof. That's the reality of what we're dealing with, and your governments don't care. Shooting a journalist, which we're seeing there, yet again. The idea of these doctors, which I was going to play you yet another clip from another doctor that's speaking up, telling you what's happening. This person giving a testimony about how she changed her mind around Israel because of all the facts. The American that they killed, and ongoing, which I'll show you next time, as how Matt Miller and the rest of them keep pretending like we won't investigate, we'll trust what Israel says about an American. Because America first, right? Or this ambassador, I'll play this one short, I'll play you this one. Here's what you're getting from these people. These people are a joke.
And Iran's fingerprints are all over all of the bad things that are going on in this region. And Iran needs to end its support for these proxies, and they need to do it now. And we need to all work for de-escalation of this conflict. That is paramount.
Unless Israel attacks, then we defend that and say nobody else can respond, right? Or that everything we can clearly prove is tied right back to Iran, right? Or the Houthis, or Hezbollah, or Hamas for that matter. But let's remember, Israel has funded Hamas up until October 7th. But you show me how you can prove all of the actions that are explicitly bound to Israel are somehow the fault of Hamas. Why? Because they're always defending themselves, apparently. This person is either that stupid or that compromised. But here's what he says when asked about the obvious culprit.
Of paramount importance right now.
What about Israel's fingerprints all over the region?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh, yeah. Good job, American politician. Really well put. Unbelievable. Now, this is a good win at the end of the day, or at least a positive step. If you haven't heard, the United Nations Assembly has adopted a Palestinian resolution calling on Israel to end its occupation by an overwhelming majority. So right there, you need to recognize that the vast majority of the world is very aware of what's going on. They don't want you to see that, though. Sam Husseini highlights who was for and who was against, who abstained. You know, abstention, which is supposed to be a part of a voting process that we got stolen from us in this country. And he also highlights that many are trying to dismiss this as non-binding. He says Craig Mokhiber points out the reality that it very clearly is, despite they lie about everything, guys. That's the reality. Orson Otrovsky, the pretend international human rights lawyer, says the ambassador is absolutely right. This is Danny Dannon saying, as we said after this week, it is evident beyond doubt, get ready to laugh, we told you this was coming, that simply put, the UN has become the diplomatic arm of Hamas. You know, the UN, right? The multifaceted entity of different countries all representing themselves and the body itself, all these moving parts, they're all just Hamas now. You know, realize that the United States is part of the United Nations, or you have to think that one through, or it doesn't matter though, because Hamas everywhere, which I said down here. Everyone I don't like is Hamas. A child's book, a guide to online political discussion. How embarrassing. Like these, you know, you realize that they're kind of a laughing stock in the circle of the UN right now. If you watch these people's responses, if you look at their faces while Israel's speaking, it's like the child is speaking. No, here we go. We're all going to be called racist. We're all going to be called Israel haters now. Get ready. And it's not even addressing the topic of the day. All they do is grandstand for the little clips they put out when nobody other than their followers support. And the reality is, if you're going to pretend that just the UN is Hamas, which I've been saying almost as a joke, you're a joke. These people are committing genocide and pretending that the only entity in some cases that's saying anything about it is somehow Hamas, even though you fund Hamas, you absolute morons. Now, here he is standing up, or rather Arami pointing out when Dannon was standing up and claiming that their action through the UN, the actual resolution that was calling for the legal conclusion of the process, he said was simply diplomatic terrorism. That's how stupid this thing is. And her point is simply that, look, or his point simply, even when we do the thing through the right channel, which, you know, whatever it is, BDS or whatever you're claiming, you still call it terrorism. Now it's diplomatic terrorism because you forced everyone to acknowledge that it's just so embarrassing. And then lastly, Hanya Naftali, thank you to the nations who stood up for Israel at the UN. Well, let's review who those nations are. The clear bunching of all the leading democratic and liberty-focused people in the world, right? The United States, Hungary, Paraguay, Fiji, Czech Republic, Argentina, Malawi, Micronesia, Nauru, Palau, Papua New Guinea, Tonga, Tuvalu. Yeah, all the leading countries in the world, clearly. Or, if you have any understanding of the world, pretty much the people that Israel's still able to influence, and literally everybody else is like, yeah, you're crazy, we're done. Or even the ones that support them are recognizing that they're on the way out. And so they're siding with history. I mean, think about how embarrassing it is for these people to go, thank you for all. I mean, I'm not diminishing these countries at all. What I'm trying to say is that in the context of the world and the global picture of the UN, that's pretty damn embarrassing. But you got to pretend it's everything because that's what they do. Now we're going to end with this great clip coming from the UN discussion about the world of double standards. So I'll leave you there. Obviously, kind of, as always, longer than I wanted today. I'll get there one day. We'll see. We'll break it down in shorter. I was actually putting more thought recently into how I could do this same version with a longer discussion, but then have some like one topic a day off I might have. I want to jump in and do something. I can find a way to do that. You know, like, and I mean, there's plenty of ways to do that, but I mean, like in a way that works for this dynamic where I can do like a quick, like call it something else, like not the daily wrap up, or even somebody suggesting I should just call it the TLAV wrap up, which I get why. I will get back to my routine schedule hopefully soon enough. But then I can have like more of a focus point and call it something new. So hey, if you got thoughts on what I could call that, some kind of new focus point for what we're doing, reach out, let me know. But thank you for your support, guys. I appreciate everyone that continues to tune in and support what we're doing and supports the Independent Media Alliance and everybody else involved and all the great people there with all the multifaceted opinions, you know, some of which think voting matters. It's very multifaceted. And that's the whole point. You won't find that in the mainstream alternative media. So thank you for supporting people that truly, truly, whether they take the right action or not, want to do the right thing. And the reason I say it like that is because we all make mistakes. People can get misled. Clearly, we can get manipulated by foreign countries. Excuse me. But the bottom line is it's about your integrity and principles. The people in this group, the people that I, collected in the TLAV organization, the reason that they're here is because we err on the side of integrity and principle and what we believe in. Clearly, in the context of this election, where everyone's telling you that only adults will end up with it, and we're bucking that whole thing because it's obviously childish to say that giving up in a system and voting for somebody you don't like is ultimately what you're supposed to do. Pretty sad, right? And again, there's plenty of discussions we've had about what other options there truly are, and we've got into that in that show that you saw in the beginning, and we'll get into it plenty more. But thank you for those that support honest, independent journalism. Thank you for being here. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
Who will aim at you and say, welcome to the world of double standards. And talking about double standards, just a while ago, we heard the representative of the occupying Israeli forces bashing you all, as he does with his predecessors, perform a show and teaching us and lecturing us about humanity and morality, totally disconnected from reality. Even today, he couldn't bring any justification nor speak about the topic we're discussing, the illegal settlements. He could not address the resolution and trying to show that the world started only on October the 7th, neglecting the fact of history. Well, if he considers this assembly a circus, guess what? I consider him a clown performing in this place, always bringing his preps, trying to produce a show, failing to make us laugh, deceiving us from reality. That's what they try to do, but they fail dramatically. So when I ask him if he thinks this place is a circus, why are you performing in it? Why are you still a member in it? Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for you to show action and not words. Nearly a year will pass and the massacres and genocide in Gaza and the West Bank is continuing. The inability of the international community, especially the Security Council, to stop these atrocities and reach a ceasefire, and the silence of many of you, is what allowed the killing of tens of thousands, injuring hundreds of thousands, the displacement of almost 2 million, the spread of famine and diseases. So today, do some justice for those innocent and vote in favor of this resolution, which would be a message from the world to the occupying forces and who support them blindly. Say enough is enough and it's time to act. Libya reaffirms its position that it won't define resistance against occupation as terrorism, and who from your countries didn't gain their independence without resistance, especially when the doors of peaceful solutions are completely shut down. Libya affirms its position that the only peaceful solution to this 7 decades of aggression and occupation is by recognizing the Palestinians' right to defend themselves and resist occupation and the right of self-determination, and having an independent state with Jerusalem, its capital. In conclusion, it's time now for all to comply and respect the outcome of the ICJ. This court, which we all know has established or was established to help in ensuring peace and justice, where international law should prevail over the use of force. Therefore, we call on you all to vote in favor of this resolution to pave the road for peace. History will remember those countries which have taken a principled, a moral, a legal or humane stance, and it will also remember those who had their humanity in deep coma and were aware and deliberately participated in this live broadcasted atrocity, especially the 21st century Holocaust, the Holocaust of Gaza. Voting in favor of this resolution today is a vote for peace, and it's a vote for justice. I thank you.